Our story begins as a biologist feeds a Tyrannosaurus for the first time, but he carelessly lets his hand slip inside as well. Upon hearing the sickening crunch of his fingers breaking, he simply begins to laugh like a complete madman. His colleague, watching the scene unfold, makes no move to stop him. Instead, he uncorks a bottle of champagne to celebrate. Because humanity, it seems, has finally succeeded in creating the ultimate ferocious Tyrannosaurus. However, John stood frozen as he witnessed this unfolding before his eyes. It was identical to the scene he had watched in Jurassic Park, a perfect mirror image. An exact replica, if his memory served him correctly, which, in this case, was rather unfortunate. To avoid accidental deaths in Jurassic World, there were originally two ferocious tyrannosaurs, a male and a female, but the male was devoured by the female. And he was, quite precisely, the one destined to be eaten. Just when John thought his death was inevitable, a screen appeared out of nowhere, a genetic fusion simulator. It was the very same game he used to play back in England. In his previous life, that is. We see that through the hunting of other animals, he now had a path forward. He could fuse their genes, the Tyrannosaurus gene for bite force, the Velociraptor gene for incredible running speed, the Giganotosaurus gene for pure, lethal power, even the squid gene for changing body color and achieving rapid growth, and the pit viper gene for the specialized perception of heat. John carefully listed the genetic abilities he possessed at that moment, realizing the potential at his fingertips. He knew that his most important mission now was to survive and develop himself with extreme caution. His goal was to eventually escape this park, because if the plot followed the movie, Jurassic World would end in bankruptcy following the Tyrannosaurus disaster. It would go bankrupt, and even Isla Nublar would be destroyed after that. The entire place would be wiped out by the eruption of a dormant volcano. Meanwhile, we see Dr. Wu, with a smile on his face, bringing over 2 pieces of fresh meat. This ferocious Tyrannosaurus was his masterpiece, and he was certain it would bring enormous profits to Jurassic World. However, just as he prepared to feed the beast, the dinosaur suddenly lunged forward. It opened its mouth, filled with teeth as sharp as saws, and bit down on the doctor's hand. With a single snap, it nearly tore Dr. Wu's fingers clean off. Haha, this is exactly how it should be, the man thought. Despite the fact that his hand was already bleeding, the expression on Dr. Wu's face didn't change. On the contrary, his smile became even more radiant, which, to be honest, is a bit unsettling. John felt firsthand the sheer ferocity and violence of this Tyrannosaurus, traits evident from the very moment of its birth. He realized he would have to accelerate his own development, or he wouldn't stand a chance against her. Although it was his first time eating raw meat, his dinosaur taste buds allowed John to enjoy it with great pleasure. He had consumed beef, gaining 0.2 gene points, and he continued eating until his stomach could take no more. In total, John had managed to earn only a single gene point. He scratched his claw, lost in thought for a moment. With a clever look in his eyes, he decided to use that gene point immediately. He invested it into the rapid growth ability of the squid gene. You see, the life cycle of a squid is very short, but their growth rate is extremely fast. Certain species of squid only need 50 days to go from hatchlings to full adults. And that was precisely the ability that Hyannin needed with such urgency. Only by growing rapidly could he gain enough strength to protect himself. Time flew by, and 3 days later, Hyannin had finally accumulated 10 gene points and invested them all into the squid gene. Specifically, he put them into the rapid growth ability. As soon as the point bar was filled, a warm current surged through Hyannin's body. The squid gene had successfully reached level 2. His growth rate had effectively doubled. Hyannin was pleasantly surprised by the result. Deep down, he knew that upgrading this genetic skill first was definitely the right decision. This Indominus Rex also possesses squid genes, which allows her to grow at an accelerated pace. But now, Hyannin's growth speed is twice as fast as hers. As long as he has a larger, stronger body combined with the intellectual advantage of a human soul, he will have nothing to fear. A few days later, we see both tyrannosaurs leaving Hyannin's first home. They were sent to Jurassic World, and to prevent any escape, tracking chips were implanted in them. During the journey to the park, he was kept locked inside a small, sealed cage. Hyannin understood perfectly well that these humans didn't consider him a living being in the slightest. To them, he was merely a tool to generate profit and gain an advantage. Since he was no longer human, he told himself he had to accept that he would be an enemy of humanity in the future. A few hours later, Hyannin and the female Indominus were taken to Paddock 11, located in the northernmost part of Jurassic World. This enclosure was surrounded by 12-meter-high reinforced concrete walls, with a tempered glass observation deck at its center. Upon entering the enclosure, we see that the interior was designed as a lush tropical jungle landscape. Hyannin knew this would be his home, and that of the female Indominus from now on, though calling it a home was a stretch, as it was really no different from a cage. With high walls on all sides, he felt like a frog trapped at the bottom of a very deep well. The female Indominus Rex was another matter entirely. He felt that if he stayed here for too long, he would eventually end up losing his mind. However, it was still far too early to attempt an escape. Even if he managed a miraculous getaway, the humans outside could easily hunt him down and capture him again. The female Indominus, having just arrived, was in a state of extreme agitation. She wouldn't stop pacing through the enclosure, biting and scratching at the walls with her massive claws. Hyenan, by contrast, calmly inspected the area, familiarizing himself with every corner of his new environment. As he looked up toward the glass platform, although he couldn't see through the one-way glass with his naked eyes, his pit viper gene allowed him to detect heat, and he could clearly perceive several humans by the infrared radiation their bodies emitted. Those humans had no idea that while they were staring into the abyss was staring right back at them. Hyenan paid them no mind. He realized that today marked exactly 1 week since his birth. The power of his Tyrannosaur gene had already reached level 2. His muscular strength had effectively doubled. The genetic points he had accumulated over these past few days were primarily used to further enhance the power of his Tyrannosaur DNA. Hyenan opened his attribute panel to check his progress. Hyenan, age, 7 days, species, Indominus rex. In just 1 single week, we see that his size had increased considerably. By comparison, the body of the female Indominus rex was much smaller and thinner than his own. Despite that obvious advantage, Hyenan didn't lower his guard for a moment. He felt he had only 2 options, either kill her to avoid future problems or subdue her. The female Tyrannosaur let out a roar of pure fury. Realizing she couldn't escape the enclosure, she had no choice but to give up on that idea, for now. Suddenly, from the other side of the wall, the familiar sound of machinery in operation echoed through the air. Dinner had arrived. Hyenan approached to eat as usual, but saw the female Indominus had already beaten him to it, seizing the entire piece of lamb. She even roared at him furiously, which, naturally, was intended as a fierce warning. She was actually protecting the food. This was, after all, the first time they had lived together. Establishing a hierarchy was crucial. In the original story, the female was bullied like this constantly by the other Indominus, until she was eventually eaten. But Hyenan, with his advantage in size and strength, obviously wasn't going to let that happen. He lunged toward her in a single, powerful leap. He aimed a fierce bite directly at her neck. The female Indominus tried to counterattack without hesitation, but Hyenan was faster and clamped his jaws down first. He twisted his neck with immense force, throwing her violently to the ground. The female Indominus fell heavily, the impact echoing through the jungle landscape. Even so, she continued to growl and show her teeth, her neck tense, refusing to surrender. But what followed was a brutal lesson in power delivered by Hyenan. Though Hyenan was still young, the damage caused by his doubled strength was enough to inflict fatal wounds on this female. A few minutes later, the female Teryx, who was being pinned to the ground by Hyenan, finally reached her limit. She rolled over, exposing her belly in a clear sign of total submission. Deep down, he thought she was incredibly weak, but at least she now understood exactly who was in charge. Only then did Hyenan release her, turning around to enjoy the spoils of his mission. The Teryx Indominus returned to his meal, knowing that animals, quite frankly, must be trained from a very young age. The female Teryx remained on the ground with her belly exposed, not daring to move an inch. She could only watch in silence as Hyenan took the first bite. When Hyenan finished eating, he let out a roar, finally giving the female Teryx permission to approach the food. And here we realized that he needed to give her a proper name. He recalled that in the movie, the leader of the velociraptors trained by the protagonist was named Blue. Since the protagonist raptor was blue and this female Teryx was a grayish-white color, he decided to call her Gray. Over the following days, Hyenan's routine included a new activity, putting Gray through all sorts of training. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had already passed since his birth. Inside enclosure number 11, a live sow was released for the hunt. Through the dense vegetation, we see Hyenan and Gray approaching, one from the left and the other from the right. They crept up stealthily behind the unsuspecting animal. In the very next second, Hyenan launched his attack. His speed was truly like a bolt of lightning. He leaped through the air and came crashing down right on top of her. The sow was slammed to the ground, letting out squeals of pure panic. He bit down on its neck. At the same time, Gray closed in and sank her teeth into its belly. A little later, the sow no longer showed any signs of life. He had successfully hunted a domestic pig, earning himself 5 gene points. The system informed him that he could now extract the domestic pig gene. He was asked if he wished to extract genes for traits like robust and burly. He decided against it. Instead, Hyenan used his 5 new points to upgrade his rapid growth squid gene. Upon reaching level 3, this rapid growth tripled Hyenan's rate of development. With his current combat power, hunting modern beasts like lions, tigers, or even grizzly bears would be a walk in the park. But that, as it turned out, was nowhere near enough. Hyenan's true enemies weren't these common beasts, they were the humans. Only when he possessed the strength to face armed personnel would he consider escaping the enclosure. In an instant, the 2 tyrannosaurs devoured the entire sow. They left no trace behind. Suddenly, Hyenan's heat perception sharply detected someone approaching the glass observation deck. It was Dr. Wu, accompanied by a fat, pot-bellied man. Deep down, he knew his current progress was nowhere near enough. Tianan's senses sharply detected someone approaching the glass observation deck. It was Dr. Wu and a fat, pot-bellied man. The pair consisted of Dr. Wu and a rather stout, pot-bellied individual. Tianan's thermal vision picked up the movement of someone nearing the glass observation platform. We see that it was Dr. Wu, walking alongside a fat, pot-bellied man. The visitors were Dr. Wu and a very large man. He was quite fat and pot-bellied. Tianan's keen senses immediately detected that someone was approaching the glass observation platform. It was Dr. Wu, accompanied by a fat, pot-bellied man. The pair consisted of Dr. Wu and that same stout, pot-bellied individual. Once again, Tianan's instincts alerted him that someone was nearing the glass observation deck. We see Dr. Wu and the fat, pot-bellied man arriving together. They were Dr. Wu and a man whose presence usually signaled trouble for those under his watch. Tianan watched closely as the figures approached the glass observation platform. It was Dr. Wu and the fat, pot-bellied man. We return to the Dr. Wu and his stout companion, a man who seemed entirely out of place in such a dangerous environment. He studied the enclosure, unaware that he was being watched by something far more intelligent than he realized. The size difference between them and Tianan was fivefold. He decided it was finally time to escape this cage and reclaim his freedom. Staying here no longer made sense. First, because resources were scarce and the food provided by the humans was far too limited. Second, he had been confined in this suffocating environment for far too long. He was done hiding in this narrow cage. It was time to fight. He planned to drive every human off the island, leaving not a single one behind. Tianan turned his head and roared at Gray, who was still busy feasting. That roar marked the beginning of their move. In the original story, the Indominus Rex first used its tree frog genes to hide from infrared scanners. Then, it left claw marks on the wall to trick the humans into believing it had climbed out and escaped. The Indominus Rex had seemingly vanished, but in reality, she had been hiding inside the enclosure the entire time. She never left. By then, other people had already entered the paddock. The Indominus, who had been lying in wait, suddenly appeared to block the small access door. The guards inside had no choice but to open the main gate to escape, and that was how she seized her chance to bolt from the enclosure. She slipped through the gate, though that entire series of maneuvers relied heavily on luck. Tianan's escape plan, however, involved far fewer detours. He was getting straight to the point. One look told him everything. This door wouldn't hold him now. This strike carried all the humiliation of his 10 months in captivity, and not even the devil himself could stop him. From the glass platform, Mercenary and Clayton simply could not believe what they were seeing. What on earth was happening? That monster, the Indominus Rex, had just smashed through the door and escaped. Gray followed close behind as they fled the enclosure together. Outside, a construction crew was still hard at work. A dinosaur. The dinosaur has escaped. Everyone descended into a state of total panic, terrified and running for their lives. One worker had barely left his post and taken a few steps when a thick, long, and rigid tail swept him up violently. The man was sent flying over 10 meters through the air, crashing heavily to the ground, broken. Faced with the humans, Tianan showed not the slightest bit of mercy. His steel claws, gleaming with a metallic luster, finished another with a single blow. Human hunted. You gain 2 gene points. Tianan despised the ridiculous amount of points. You gain 2 gene 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 points. They were all falling like dominoes. Obviously, the situation was spiraling. Locate the position of the 2 Indominus Rexes immediately and notify the asset containment unit to send armed teams to capture them at once, Masrani ordered in a desperate rush. And tell the asset containment unit they are only to use non-lethal weapons. Do not harm them under any circumstances. Make sure to capture them alive, he made sure to emphasize. Meanwhile, Tianan moved forward with firm, powerful strides, leading Gray away quickly. Once they were far from the Enclosure 11 area, he activated the psychic perception of his snake genes. Now, every movement within a kilometer was captured. As he walked, Tianan felt that he had finally broken free from the shackles of his cage, and he couldn't help but spread his arms wide. Beyond the sea, there must be freedom. Escaping the enclosure was only the first step. What followed would be the hunt by the humans. It was time to give these arrogant humans a little Jurassic surprise. He extended his long forelimbs and located a specific point on his left shoulder. Suddenly, he dug his steel claws in with force. A chip the size of a human thumb appeared in his hand, a tracking device, as we might have guessed. After that, he helped Gray remove the chip implanted in her own left shoulder. Although both of them had successfully removed the devices, Tianan didn't just throw them away. They were perfect for misleading the humans. Meanwhile, back in the Jurassic World control room, Masrani and Clayton, still pale from the shock, rushed inside. According to the radio frequency identification chips implanted in the 2 Indominus Rexes, they could track their location. They were moving rapidly south. The control room called the Asset Containment Unit, ordering Team 1 to target the 2 fugitive Indominus Rexes using only non-lethal weapons for the operation. Understood. More than 10 armed members of Team 1 responded in unison, quickly equipping themselves with their non-lethal gear. They climbed into 2 off-road vehicles and set off immediately. On the big screen, real-time footage from the containment unit was displayed. They stopped suddenly. The chip locator showed that the 2 Indominus Rexes had halted. The entire team was ordered to disembark. As the operation began, the armed personnel quickly got out of the vehicles, weapons in hand. They entered the virgin jungle with great care. The captain of Team 1 was an Asian mercenary. On his right wrist, he wore a watch equipped with a tracker as the group crossed a gently flowing stream. The captain checked the location shown on his watch, which matched their current position perfectly. But in the surrounding area, there was no sign of the 2 Indominus Rexes, and the thermal detector recorded nothing unusual. How strange. Just as the captain was feeling bewildered, he suddenly seemed to discover something. He signaled with his hand, indicating for the team members to stop. 2 grayish-white rocks appeared in the captain's field of vision, but upon looking closer, he realized they weren't rocks at all. They were 2 pieces of flesh covered in grayish-white scales. To be honest, this was exactly the kind of trap they should have feared. The captain knelt down and picked up one of the pieces, noticing that the blood on the flesh hadn't even clotted yet. When he turned it over, he found a radio frequency identification chip staring back at him. It was still embedded in the meat, blinking with a steady, rhythmic light. What on earth is that? Jurassic World indeed. Back in the control room, Masrani asked the question with a look of utter confusion. Those are the 2 Indominus Rexes, or at least, what's left of their trackers. They are the chips we implanted. It's incredible, but they actually ripped them out themselves. Clayton stood there, stunned. Meanwhile, in the virgin jungle, a drop of fresh blood suddenly fell onto the captain's wrist. The captain looked up and saw that the leaves above him, somehow, were already coated in blood. The dense foliage of the forest began to shift, even though there wasn't a breath of wind. In the very next second, right before the captain's eyes, a massive and fierce reptilian head appeared out of thin air among the treetops, followed closely by the rest of its imposing and formidable body. What a surprise, and what a truly terrifying one at that. There they were, 2 enormous Indominus Rexes. Looking down at that group of tiny humans, their eyes shined with a cold light, and my god, it can camouflage. The captain's mind went completely blank as the realization hit him. The moment those words left the captain's mouth, Tianan lunged forward. He opened his massive jaws and bit the man right through the waist. Hardly had the captain finished his sentence when the predator struck. Tianan pounced, opened his enormous maw, and snapped him up in a single, brutal motion. And just like that, he swallowed him in a single gulp. He had successfully hunted a human. Gene points obtained, 3. Gene points obtained, 3. In comparison, the points earned for hunting this armed personnel are slightly higher. Just a moment ago, Tianan had used the ghostly camouflage of his cuttlefish genes and the multispectral invisibility of his frog genes to hide his form. And by the look of things, the effect was quite impressive. Back in the control room, the captain's real-time vital signs monitor suddenly turned into a flat, silent line. Masrani watched in horror. The predator's power was growing stronger. Tianan was becoming more formidable with every passing second. Fire! Fire! The soldiers screamed. The rest of the armed team was utterly startled to see him appear out of thin air like a ghost. However, they reacted quickly, raising their shock rifles and beginning to open fire. Yet, as the darts hit Tianan's body one after another, an electrical discharge of that magnitude barely caused a slight numbness in his muscles. To be honest, it was no different than being tickled. Ignoring the electrical weapons entirely, Tianan pressed forward with grim determination. He lunged directly into the squad of armed personnel. Several of them simply couldn't scramble out of the way in time. And with the tremendous force of the impact, they were sent flying through the air. They traced several arcs across the sky before crashing heavily onto the forest floor. We see now that the Indominus Rex is a lethal weapon from head to toe. In less than 5 minutes, the more than 10 armed members who had arrived were completely annihilated. The last one remaining, seeing that all his comrades were dead, fell into a state of pure panic. He threw down his weapon and turned around to flee for his life. But just as he did, he saw the other Indominus Rex, a smaller female, appearing right in front of him. Her jaws, filled with interlocking fangs, grew larger and larger in his vision, until they snapped shut, and then he couldn't see anything at all. After dealing with that group of armed personnel, Tianan had accumulated more than 50 gene points. For now, he would save them. Those gene points would certainly be useful later on. Back in the control room, the vital signs of the armed team, one after another, became flat lines on the monitors. The silence in the room was absolute. They're all dead. What do we do now? One of the staff members cried out. Another staff member asked with a trembling voice, and what about the 2 Indominus Rex? We see that they had already lost track of their location entirely. Clyde looked toward his boss, Masrani, waiting for a decision. Notify the second team of the asset containment unit to act immediately, Masrani ordered. They are to be equipped with heavy weaponry and search the entire area. As soon as they find the trail of those 2 Indominus Rex, kill them without mercy. In the end, Masrani had no choice but to give up on his original plan. He had to abandon the idea of capturing the 2 Indominus Rex that were now loose in the zone. The control system for the creatures had failed completely, and to avoid further losses, he accepted the painful decision to eliminate them. The sunlight filtered through the thinning leaves of the forest, bathing the edge of the virgin jungle in light. Continuing their journey south, Hyanin and Gray finally managed to cross the forest. In the distance, an infinite plain finally came into view. This was the enclosure for the herbivorous dinosaurs. At a glance, we see colossal brachiosauruses and apatosauruses, alongside herds of triceratops and fugosauruses, and even ankylosauruses covered in heavy, natural armor. And for the Indominus rex, this was nothing less than a private hunting ground. Although Hyanin had already integrated many animal genes, it still wasn't enough. He still had his weak points. He realized that his defense, for example, was his greatest deficiency at the moment. To compensate for this weakness, he knew he had to continue evolving the Indominus rex form. While the control system had failed completely, Hyanin decided to integrate more genes from other animals to keep strengthening his own genetic abilities. Hyanin fixed his sights on 3 ankylosauruses that were peacefully strolling and eating, choosing his first target. After locking onto his prey, his hind legs struck the ground with colossal force. He shot forward like a rocket, tearing through the wind as he moved. And then, he lunged to kill the nearest ankylosaurus. The ankylosauruses, being naturally slow to react, took a moment to realize the danger. They finally noticed the presence of the Indominus rex and, gripped by panic, began to run. As the ground shook violently, Hyanin caught up to them in just a couple of strides. He reached the one that had fallen behind and, with a brutal impact, flipped it onto its back. Its belly, unprotected by bony plates, was precisely the ankylosaurus's greatest weak point. Without a moment's hesitation, Hyanin opened his massive jaws and bit down. The ankylosaurus, with its incredible vitality, didn't die instantly, but it no longer had any chance of survival. But Hyanin, having successfully hunted one ankylosaurus, had no intention of stopping there. He turned back around, fully intent on finishing off the remaining ankylosauruses. Seeing that Hyanin wasn't giving them a moment's peace, the 2 survivors decided to stop running and suddenly began to swing. Their long, powerful tails sliced through the air with brutal force, aimed directly at Hyanin's legs. The destructive power of an ankylosaurus's tail club is not to be taken lightly, not if you value your limbs. If one of those blows connects, the most likely outcome is that your bones will be reduced to dust. But Hyanin was prepared to take full advantage of his superior agility. The moment he saw them swing their tails, his velociraptor genes kicked in, allowing him to leap back and dodge instantly. And as their attacks missed, he repeated his previous tactic to violently knock another one of them over. Then, with a savage swipe of his steel-like claws, he tore open its soft underbelly. In the end, the last ankylosaurus couldn't escape Hyanin's grasp either and ended up right alongside its companions. As they lay there on the ground, all neatly lined up, the strength finally left their bodies. As their lives slowly flickered out, we see that he has successfully hunted an ankylosaurus. He earns 150 gene points for his efforts. The system informs him that he can now extract the ankylosaurus gene. This would grant him reinforced bone armor, level 1. Did he want to extract it? Hyanin didn't hesitate for a single second. He selected confirm immediately, and at that very moment, a wave of scorching heat erupted from deep within his bones. The skin on the surface of Hyanin's body began to change with a visible vibration. The grayish scales covering his entire frame became harder and thicker, taking on a texture very similar to solid bone. Furthermore, they were covered in a layer of keratin, and from them, spikes as sharp as razors began to sprout. Ankylosaurus gene, fusion successful. Without a second thought, Hyanin used all the gene points he had accumulated to power up the Ankylosaurus gene. In a single stroke, he raised his reinforced bone armor to level 4. And that was that. His accumulated points were completely spent. Hyanin took a moment to examine the grayish scales covering his body. Their hardness had taken a qualitative leap, and they were now far more resistant than mere bone. They even shimmered with a faint, metallic glint. With the upgrade complete, Hyanin signaled to Hale, who was following him everywhere like a loyal puppy. Together, they settled in to devour their hard-earned meal. After filling his stomach a bit, Hyanin continued on his way with Hale by his side. Searching for a new path, Hyanin moved to a nearby area, looking for his next hunting target. He knew he had to hurry and hunt more creatures to gain points and grow stronger before the humans launched their next attack. Meanwhile, at the Dinosaur Genetic Research Center, a furious Mashrani went to find Dr. Wu. Wu, Henry, tell me, you have to tell me, what kind of monsters are these 2 Indominus rex you created? The moment he saw Dr. Wu, Mashrani interrogated him without any preamble. I'm sorry, you know I am not authorized to reveal the genetic makeup of the Indominus rex. It is an InGen corporate secret, he added. Dr. Wu spoke from his office chair, taking a sip of tea with all the calm in the world, which was a bit much, given the circumstances. They killed people, Mashrani emphasized, his voice heavy with the weight of the situation. How unfortunate. Dr. Wu simply arched an eyebrow, seemingly unmoved by the gravity of the situation. Mashrani continued, pointing out that his research had caused an absolute disaster. He warned him that the board of directors was going to confiscate all of his work. And you will have to assume full legal responsibility for this, he added sternly. Mashrani's tone left no room for argument. He was laying down the law. Dr. Wu merely smiled, as he was all too familiar with that particular look capitalists were when things go wrong. But if Mashrani intended to shift all the blame onto him, then he decided it was time to leave. We move now to the herbivore paddock in the northern zone of Jurassic World. At that moment, the park's numerous peaceful dinosaurs were plunged into a state of total chaos. One after another, they let out panicked cries that echoed through the valley. And all of this was happening, of course, because two gods of death had just broken into the park. The bone-chilling roar of the Indominus Rex rang out once again, signaling their arrival. A herd of Van Long, famous for their massive size, reacted instantly upon hearing that roar. Completely terrified, they fled in a desperate scramble, moving their heavy, clumsy bodies as fast as they could. The last adult Van Long, having fallen behind the rest, had no choice but to stop and turn. It turned around to face those two fierce and terrifying predators head-on. To give us some perspective, this Van Long was 25 meters long and 15 meters high. It was as tall as a 5-story building, with a weight exceeding 50 tons. It was far larger than the two Indominus Rex, but in the end, it was still just a herbivore. Boom. Despite facing a Van Long much bigger than himself, Kainan didn't show even a hint of fear. With a violent surge of power, his hind legs practically shattered the ground beneath him. And bursting forward with lightning speed, he charged head-on against the massive Van Long. Gray wasn't about to stand idly by either, quickly charging from the side to support Jianen's offensive. Jianen's enormous jaws opened wide, revealing a truly terrifying sight. He aimed directly for the Van Long's thick, long neck and clamped down with a ferocious bite. His bite force, enhanced by Tyrannosaurus genes, exploded with lethal intensity in an instant. In a single mouthful, the skin and flesh of the creature's neck were torn away. The Van Long's neck was easily pierced by teeth as sharp as steel blades. Combined with a bite force 5 times greater than normal, he directly shattered the cervical vertebrae. The dragon's massive body collapsed to the ground, looking like a mountain pillar crumbling down. Jianen followed up with a finishing blow, precisely driving his steel claws into the Van Long's main artery. Not long after, the Van Long bled out and died, its struggle finally coming to an end. He wondered if he had earned gene points for taking down such a massive opponent. 300 points. And yes, it seemed he could indeed extract the Van Long's genetic material. The skill available was gigantism, and the system asked if he wished to extract it. At this, Jianen's spirits rose considerably. This Van Long gene was, to be honest, an incredibly useful skill to have in his arsenal. For him, the logic was simple. Being bigger meant being significantly stronger, and being more robust simply meant he would be far more imposing to his enemies. He couldn't help but think how great it would be to become as massive as King Kong or Godzilla. What do you think of that? Quite a transformation, isn't it? As the process began, Jianen felt his entire body turning into a volcano on the verge of eruption. It was as if all the blood in his veins had suddenly transformed into boiling magma. The pain was nearly unbearable, forcing Jianen to grit his teeth in agony. A low, uncontrollable roar escaped from deep within his throat, which began to worry Gray, who was standing right beside him. It hurt far too much, and Jianen could do nothing but clench his jaw tighter. From the depths of his throat, he struggled to maintain control. What was happening to him? The sheer intensity of the change was overwhelming, and Gray watched on, feeling increasingly concerned for his companion. Gray let out a roar of his own, desperately asking him if he was all right. In that very instant, inside his body, countless cells and tissues were multiplying and dividing at an impossible rate. We see his muscles and bones stretching, growing rapidly throughout his entire frame. In a remarkably short time, Jianen's body expanded like a sponge soaking up water. He underwent a striking change. His entire structure scaled up until his length stabilized at 20 meters and his height reached 10. His weight, at the very least, more than doubled, skyrocketing to a massive 50 tons. When the burning sensation finally began to fade, Jianen raised his head to the sky and let out a thunderous, satisfied roar. He could feel an immense, unprecedented power filling every corner of his new body. Upon checking his data panel, it was confirmed. Jianen was now 20 meters long and weighed a staggering 50 tons. Nearby, Gray stood as a silent witness to this incredible expansion that had occurred in such a short window of time. The smaller creature was truly awestruck, realizing he would have to hold on tight to his big brother from now on. Jianen gave him a gentle pat on the head, a simple gesture to reassure him that everything was fine. It could be said that Gray was his only real family now. Or rather, Helan, which is why Jianen didn't place much value on anything else. We move now to the central core zone of the Jurassic World. This was the heart of the resort, where the various commercial facilities were concentrated. All the tourists evacuated from the North Park had been gathered here. There were over 20,000 people, and since they had no idea what was actually happening, their complaints against the park were endless. In the control room, Miss Ronnie and Clyde, who had already returned, took command of the situation once again. Meanwhile, the second asset containment team was already on its way in an all-terrain vehicle. This time, they were all armed to the teeth with live ammunition, which was probably for the best. They soon located the two untamed tyrannosaurs. They were in the Gyrosphere Valley, just south of the herbivorous dinosaur park. To the west, they were already very close to the pterosaur aviary, a staff member reported loudly. Masrani immediately ordered that the second containment team be notified. In a state of high agitation, he also called for the third containment team to be ready at once. Just at that moment, the elevator door slid open and a very well-dressed man stepped inside. It was Hoskins. Masrani, clearly not pleased, asked him what on earth he was doing there. He frowned deeply as he waited for an answer. Hoskins simply replied with a smile that he had come to help them, of course. He suggested that if they wanted to take down those two tyrannosaurs, the best way was to use other dinosaurs to fight them. For the past few years, he explained, he had been researching exactly how to utilize velociraptors in actual combat. This, he claimed, was the perfect opportunity to prove their worth. His plan was simple: use the raptors to hunt down the two untamed tyrannosaurs. It was impossible. Upon hearing Hoskins' proposal, Masrani shook his head without a second thought. He asked what exactly Hoskins planned to do about the tourists. After all, there were more than 20,000 people gathered there. Hoskins merely replied that they had nowhere else to escape to anyway. He insisted he would handle the job his way and take full charge of the incident. He promised he wouldn't allow a single tourist to get hurt, which was a bold claim, to say the least. Masrani stared intently at Hoskins for a long moment. He then turned away and gave a sharp order to have his helicopter prepared immediately. He also commanded them to take the M134 from the armory. Once installed, he vowed that he wouldn't let those two untamed tyrannosaurs escape again. Everyone in the control room was left completely stunned by this. They couldn't believe their boss, Masrani, was going to personally pilot the helicopter into the fray. While Masrani prepared for combat, we see Jinan and Gray continuing their journey south toward the western Gyrosphere Valley. This was the most famous attraction in Jurassic World, where tourists could normally wander freely and get close to the gentle herbivores. However, due to the emergency, the gyrospheres were no longer running, and the beauty of the place had been utterly destroyed. Everywhere they looked, the carcasses of fallen dinosaurs littered the landscape. As the helicopter hovered over the area, the devastation became even more apparent. Among the remains, they could see the distinctive bony horns of a triceratops, Styracosaurus genes, bony spikes. With this new equipment, the offensive power of Jinan's head and tail naturally increased by a considerable margin. Whether he chose to use a headbutt or a swipe of his tail, both attacks now possessed the lethal piercing capability of a horn and sharp spikes. Just then, in the distance, the low rumble of engines began to echo through the air. Through his psychic perception, Jinan detected two more off-road vehicles racing toward their position at full speed. The human pursuers had returned, and they weren't exactly coming for a friendly visit. Jinan knew that, this time, the humans were going all out. The danger was extremely high, and he knew he couldn't afford to lower his guard for even a second. Jinan immediately let out a low roar to Gray and hurried him away. They retreated once more into the thick, lush foliage of the West Valley forest. Using his squid gene camouflage and multi-band invisibility, he vanished into the shadows to set an ambush. A short time later, the roar of the two off-road engines grew much closer. Meanwhile, in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle sat the captain of Asset Containment Team 2, a burly man who was intently monitoring an advanced radar device. Suddenly, the life detector emitted a sharp alert, and a clear red dot appeared on the screen. Found him, 3 o'clock direction. The captain gave the order immediately, though deep down, he was feeling a bit confused. Why had the radar only detected a single target in the entire area? Suddenly, a deafening crash thundered from right behind them. When the captain turned around, he could hardly believe what his eyes were seeing. The second off-road vehicle, the one following right behind them, was sent flying through the air. As it fell, a massive beast's leg, thick as a pillar, crushed it, turning the entire vehicle into a heap of scrap metal. Good God, it was only when the captain looked all the way up that he finally saw the owner of that leg. It was, quite literally, a monstrosity that completely blocked his entire field of vision. We are looking at the largest Indominus bear Tyrannosaurus rex of them all. According to the reports, this subadult Indominus bear was 15 meters long and 7.5 meters high, the biggest recorded. But seeing it with his own eyes, the captain realized the true Tyrannosaurus rex Indominus bear was twice as large as the reports claimed. And that wasn't all. Not even the life-detecting radar had been able to pick up its presence. Could it be that he was even capable of blocking the radar's electromagnetic waves? In the Jurassic World Central Control Room, Clyde and the others watched the real-time images from Team 2 with growing nervousness. We returned to the Asset Containment Group in the control room, where the equipment began to beep incessantly. That familiar sound echoed again and again, signaling a presence they couldn't ignore. Seeing the creature reappear on the screen like a ghost, Clyde and his team turned pale with fear. It seemed he also possessed the ability to remain completely invisible to their radar. Am I seeing this right? His size, it seems to have increased massively all of a sudden. He has grown horns, and a cluster of sharp spikes has sprouted all along his tail. My god, is it possible that he has been evolving this entire time? As they faced him, they felt their entire understanding of the world shatter into pieces. Fire! Open fire! Deep inside the forest, although the captain was paralyzed with fear, he reacted quickly and shouted his orders at the top of his lungs. The moment he finished speaking, the team members inside the vehicle grabbed their submachine guns and assault rifles. Incessant bursts of fire erupted from the cold barrels of their weapons. A storm of metal, made of countless bullets, was frantically unleashed against his colossal form. However, the scene everyone expected, where the Indominus bear Tyrannosaurus Rex would be riddled with bullets, simply never happened. One after another, an endless stream of bullets struck the body of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. But they only produced a metallic screeching sound, triggering violent sparks upon impact. How could this even be possible? A scene so terrifying was completely beyond the comprehension of everyone present. It was as if they were merely tickling him. Gianna didn't flinch or dodge, completely ignoring the bullets flying his way. With massive strides, he accelerated toward the off-road vehicle. The trees standing in his path were brutally crushed by the sheer violence of his dragon-like body. "Drive! Get us out of here now!" the captain screamed in a panic to the team member behind the wheel. The driver slammed the accelerator to the floor, the engine roaring at maximum power, trying to escape at any cost. However, the speed Gianna unleashed was far greater than that of the truck as it tried to pull away. The distance between them began to shrink more and more with every passing second. Refusing to give up, the captain raised a sniper rifle, aimed at the beast's head, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Under the blinding flash of the muzzle, the sniper bullet went flying through the air. In the blink of an eye, it struck Gianna's skull directly. At a distance of 100 meters, a sniper round capable of piercing a 20mm steel plate hit the Tyrannosaurus's skull, but the round simply became embedded in his scales, leaving nothing more than a shallow crater. "Not bad. At the very least, you managed to scratch me a little." The Tyrannosaurus Rex let out a truly malevolent roar. In the very next second, Gianna was already looming over those terrified humans. "Jump out of the vehicle," the captain screamed once again. He flung the door open and leaped, but the rest of the team members reacted half a second too late. And in that brief fraction of time, Gianna delivered a kick that sent the entire truck flying. The chassis spun several times through the air and landed on its roof with a deafening crash, completely mangled. Meanwhile, the captain who had escaped by jumping rolled across the ground, feeling as if every bone in his body had shattered. He barely managed to pull himself to his feet through sheer force of will. But just as he stood, he saw a reptilian head several times larger than himself, a gargantuan skull, right in front of him. His jaws opened slightly, curling into a curve of pure cruelty. This wasn't just any expression, it wasn't the smile of the Mona Lisa, but rather that of the devil himself. The captain let out a scream, but in the following second, that scream was cut short abruptly. The captain's cry vanished, silenced in an instant by the inevitable. On the forest floor, only a few stray drops of blood remained. Finally, the Tyrannosaurus Rex approached the overturned truck and took a lingering look inside. Seeing that there were still humans clinging to life, he crushed them with a single, heavy step. With this final blow, the captain was gone, and the second team of the containment unit was completely wiped out. Back in the Jurassic World control room, we see the vital signs of the entire team disappear one by one. Clyde and the others were left completely speechless. That wild and cruel Tyrannosaurus Rex is, quite simply, a monster. With the conventional weaponry they had on hand, they were no match for him. Now, their only remaining hope rested elsewhere. As for Masrani, who was piloting the aircraft, he was left lifeless. The captain was gone. On the panel, the elimination messages updated constantly, granting Gianna more than 30 gene points. However, hunting these humans wasn't exactly a profitable endeavor. These measly gene points were barely a drop in the bucket for someone like Gianna. It wasn't until the battle ended that Gianna called out to Gray, who had been hiding, to come out. After all, she isn't quite like Gianna, at least, not yet. If those bullets were to hit her, her life would be in serious danger. That is why Gianna had kept her tucked away safely the entire time. Gray approached Gianna's side and, visibly worried, checked for injuries until she found the bullet lodged in his head armor. With a soft growl, Gray gestured for Gianna to lower his head. Then, she extended her claws to carefully help him remove the stuck round. She pulled it out with great care and then used her tongue to gently lick the wound. There, he wasn't really hurt, of course. It was only a tiny bit of blood, and Gianna couldn't help but find the situation a bit amusing. The sniper wound had barely bled at all, but in its place, Gray had left a literal puddle of drool. Just at that moment, Gianna suddenly heard a sound echoing from the sky. It was the unmistakable roar of helicopter blades slicing through the air. Looking up, we see a helicopter heading straight into the sky, right toward them. It was closing in, and its cabin door was swung wide open. Mounted there was a heavy M134 machine gun, a terrifying sight, to be sure. Deep down, Gianna felt her heart skip a beat as she realized the danger. Immediately, he roared at Gray to flee first, intending to draw the helicopter's fire himself. Gray sensed the peril as well, and clearly didn't want him taking such a risk. but faced with Gianna's stern roar, she had no choice but to turn and run. As the aircraft ascended, she vanished into the dense Sigu forest while Gianna headed elsewhere. He broke into a full sprint, his target still several hundred meters away. It was the pterosaur aviarium, located right at the edge of the Sigu forest. After all, Gianna had no real way of attacking targets in the air. Against a helicopter, he could do little more than passively endure the assault. In a situation like this, one can hardly blame him for seeking out some reinforcements. As he reached the aviarium, we see that the pilot of the helicopter was none other than Mercenary himself. At his side stood two heavily armed men, ready for the kill. The heavy machine gun at the helicopter's door roared to life and opened fire. Deafening bursts erupted from the barrel in a relentless hail of lead. Countless large-caliber bullets chased after the Tyrannosaurus as he scrambled for cover. They peppered the ground, though the rugged terrain and Gianna's incredible speed allowed him to dodge most of them. Even so, many of them struck Gianna's body, producing the incessant sound of metal clashing against metal. Despite his efforts, several bullets found their mark, yet they only rang out like hammers hitting an anvil. How is this even possible? One has to wonder if this Indominus Tyrannosaurus is actually made of iron. The sight left the three men in the helicopter completely speechless, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. Suddenly, not far off, a massive circular glass structure appeared in Mercenary's field of vision. It was the pterosaur aviarium, standing tall against the landscape. And here we see the fierce Indominus Tyrannosaurus crashing headfirst right into the side of the building. His incredible strength shattered the tempered glass instantly, tearing open a massive, gaping hole. Shards of glass flew everywhere, glittering like deadly rain in the sunlight. No. There was something unfolding here that they couldn't quite see yet. Upon seeing this, Mercenary's face twisted in immediate horror as the realization hit him. If those pterosaurs escape, not only is his helicopter in danger, but the remaining tourists will face a total catastrophe. The moment Gianna burst into the aviarium, every single pterosaur inside was thrown into a state of pure panic. Faced with such a massive and terrifying creature, they all began to shriek in absolute terror. This place serves as the primary habitat for medium and small pterosaurs, such as pteranodons and dimorphodons. Inside the aviarium, the total number of these flying reptiles is at least 400 or 500. Suddenly, the thunderous roar of Gianna Pym echoed throughout the massive enclosure. He snapped his jaws shut, catching a bold pterosaur that had been perched atop an artificial mountain. His speed was like a bolt of lightning, fast, precise, and utterly lethal. Although the 5-foot pterosaur tried to take flight, it was already far too late for the poor creature. The Tyrannosaurus Rex bit down on it with deadly, surgical precision. He clamped his jaws around its neck, which was as thin and fragile as a bamboo stalk. The bold pterosaur stood no chance, and in an instant, it was reduced to little more than dust. After that, Gianna devoured the 5-foot pterosaur as if it were nothing more than a light snack. He swallowed it in a single gulp, having successfully hunted the brazen creature. We see that he has earned 3 gene points, allowing him to extract the dragon wing flight gene. The question remained, did he wish to extract it? Dragon wing flight. Gianna was fascinated. He knew that if he fused this gene, he could achieve something truly great. But there was nothing to be done just yet, even though the pterosaur had been dealt with and the potential was immense. It was a job well done, certainly, but he realized this was simply not the right moment to begin a genetic fusion. It would be much better to wait until he had shaken off his human pursuers and found a safe place to rest. And so, the Tyrannosaurus Rex unleashed a merciless slaughter inside the pterosaur aviarium. The terrified pterosaurs within the enclosure took flight, escaping through the jagged hole in the tempered glass. Inside the helicopter, as they looked out at the massive, swarming flock of pterosaurs, which was now pouring out in a frantic stampede, Mercenary and his companions turned pale with terror. The pilot tried desperately to gain altitude to escape the swarm, but the pterosaurs spotted fresh prey inside the cabin, and they had absolutely no intention of letting them get away. One particularly daring pterosaur slammed violently against the side of the helicopter. The entire aircraft shuddered, causing the soldier operating the heavy machine gun to lose his balance and tumble toward the open door. By some miracle, he managed to grab hold of the door's edge, clinging on for dear life to avoid the fall. But in the very next second, another brazen pterosaur lunged at him and forcibly snatched him away. And that was only the beginning, as more and more pterosaurs swarmed, attacking the helicopter with insane fury. The chaos continued until the rotor blades snapped under the violent impacts and tore completely away. Boom. The helicopter broke apart and the door was ripped off, leaving the entire aircraft to fall like a kite without a string. It plummeted from the sky and crashed directly into the pterosaur aviarium. The fuselage exploded with a violent roar. The pilot, Mercenary, and the soldier acting as co-pilot were killed instantly. To be honest, there wasn't even a trace of their bodies left behind. It was over. In the Jurassic World control room, Clyde and the others who witnessed the scene turned pale, utterly desperate. Quickly, evacuate all the visitors, Clyde shouted, reacting suddenly to the unfolding disaster. In the room, we see the face of only one person. He wore a smile that he simply could not suppress. It was Hoskins. Now that Maslany was dead, there was no one left to stop his plans. Meanwhile, at the Jurassic World Resort, more than 20,000 tourists were gathered together. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a containment anomaly, all visitors are requested to seek shelter immediately. The announcement suddenly blared over the loudspeakers, catching everyone off guard. The tourists hadn't even had time to react when they heard a series of sharp shrieks echoing from the distant sky. Looking toward the sound, they saw a massive flock of pterosaurs diving toward them, baring their claws and fangs. Pterosaurs? Why on earth were there so many pterosaurs on the loose? The scene dissolved into absolute chaos in an instant. But the flock that approached soon turned. That approaching flock was, evidently, moving much faster than anyone expected. The largest pterosaurs, some with 5-foot wingspans, began to dive bomb one after another. And they started snatching tourists right off the ground as if they were nothing more than little chicks. In no time at all, many visitors were injured, and blood began to flow everywhere. The scene was total mayhem, but at that moment, an ATV appeared, racing in the opposite direction of the crowd. The man driving didn't hesitate to raise a tranquilizer dart rifle, picking off the threats from the ground. It was a desperate struggle, but one by one, he began shooting down the pterosaurs that were wreaking such havoc. But what the hell was actually happening here? That man was none other than the protagonist of our Jurassic World saga, Oven. A little earlier, he had been training his velociraptors as usual back at their enclosure. But when he heard there was an emergency at Jurassic World, he came to investigate what was going on. He certainly didn't expect that, upon arrival, he would be met with an attack by a massive flock of pterosaurs. With the arrival of more containment personnel, they barely managed to get the chaos at the resort under control. Most of the pterosaurs were hit by darts and neutralized, but a small group managed to escape. With those wings of theirs, they could easily fly far beyond the borders of Isla Nublar. If they were to reach the human world, it would be an absolute catastrophe. Without anyone noticing, the sky had begun to grow dark. Still not knowing the full extent of the disaster, Oven hurried toward the Jurassic World Central Control Room. As soon as he arrived, Oven ran straight into Hoskins, who had brought along a group of heavily armed mercenaries who already had the entire control room under their thumb. Following Mashrani's sacrifice, every single one of the original Jurassic World employees had been dismissed. Now, the mercenaries brought in by Hoskins were the ones in charge of everything. Oven, you've arrived just in time. The board of directors has granted me authority over Jurassic World's emergency operations, Hoskins told Oven with a patently false smile. What the hell happened? Why did the pterosaurs escape from the aviary? Oven questioned him sharply. So you still don't know what happened? Well, let me tell you. Hoskins then explained all the details regarding the escape of the two Indominus Rex, leaving Oven completely stunned. Now, I have a combat plan, and I need your cooperation. I need the velociraptors you trained to hunt down those two escaped Indominus Rex, Hoskins said, slowly revealing his true intentions at last. Don't even think about it. It's impossible. Upon hearing the proposal, Oven refused without a moment's hesitation. He knew perfectly well that Hoskins had always coveted his trained velociraptors. And that's not even mentioning that those two Indominus Rex are not something 4 simple velociraptors could ever hope to face. Furthermore, the raptors' training had never actually been put to the test in a real combat situation. If the velociraptors were to regain their freedom and spiral out of control, the consequences would be unthinkable. I'm not negotiating with you. I am the one in command here now. My men are already on their way to the velociraptor paddock to begin the operation. With or without you, the result will be the same, Hoskins said, in a tone that clearly left no room for argument. In the end, for the safety of the remaining tourists, Oven had no choice but to accept Hoskins' combat plan. He agreed to personally lead the velociraptors to track down the two Indominus Rex, collaborating with Hoskins' team of mercenaries to hunt them. Meanwhile, back at the aviary, we see that every single one of the pterosaurs had already escaped through the breach. The wreckage of the crashed helicopter continued to burn, the flames still flickering amidst the chaos. At the same time, Jonin, the very source of all the disasters in the Jurassic world, had already left the pterosaur pavilion. He returned to the West Valley Forest, finding a hidden spot to finally merge with the pterosaur genes. With a single thought, he immediately initiated the fusion process with the pterosaur DNA. That familiar burning sensation coursed through his body once more, spreading through every one of Jonin's muscles and bones. The pain was unbearable. Suddenly, with a sharp crack from his ribs on both sides of his chest, a blood-curdling sound of snapping bones echoed through the quiet forest. 2 thick, long tubular bones pierced through the skin of his sides, slowly extending outward. The agony was so immense that Jonin couldn't help but let out a guttural roar. These 2 symmetrical tubular bones possessed a hollow structure, much like a bird's. They grew and stretched frantically, like bamboo shoots after a rain, until they reached a length of 30 meters. Only then did they finally slow down and come to a halt. By the time they were fully deployed, the complete skeletal structure of the wings had a total wingspan of 60 meters. And yet, the fusion with the pterosaur genes was still far from over. Once the wing skeleton had formed, a thin, smooth membrane began to slowly stretch across it. Finally, the fusion with the pterosaur genes was drawing to a close. The pain intensified one last time before it began to fade away, little by little. Feeling impatient to see the results, Jonan approached a nearby stream. He paused to observe his reflection in the shimmering surface of the water. In a word, it was impressive. The pair of wings looked like a perfect creation of nature, as if he had been born with them. After merging with the pterosaur genes, just as he had desired, a pair of wings had finally grown from his back. He had, at long last, obtained the ability to fly. But to know how effective they truly were, he would have to test them for himself. Jonan let out a powerful roar, one filled with pure, raw emotion. He looked toward the distant firmament as his silver-white dragon wings unfurled completely, looking both imposing and wild. His proud dragon body seemed ready to leap into the heavens at any moment. Jonan beat his wings with the same natural ease as if he were simply moving his own arms. A powerful and turbulent current of air began to rise beneath his massive frame. The great dragon's body shifted toward the sky, growing stronger until he became a gust of wind that swept everything aside. He felt his body becoming lighter, defying the very laws of gravity. In the very next second, Jonan's robust and powerful hind legs suddenly exerted a tremendous force. He crushed the ground with ease, leaving two deep craters where he had stood just a moment before. With the agility and skill of a true dragon, he made an extraordinary leap. At the same time, Jonan took hold of the air with his imposing and majestic wings. He began to beat them rapidly, and with every flap, a powerful force of lift and thrust surged beneath him. This caused his 50-ton dragon body to rise slowly, gaining height steadily until he reached the clouds. He was actually flying. He looked down and watched as the ground drifted further and further away. He soared over the tallest trees one by one, with an excitement on his face that was impossible to hide. At first, his speed was quite slow, but as Jonan grew more accustomed to the pace, he became stronger. As he became more and more used to flying, he steadily increased the frequency with which he beat his dragon wings. His flight speed began to increase without pause. While flying steadily through the air, Jonan discovered a familiar figure on the ground below. It was Gray, from whom he had been separated earlier. Jonan immediately called out to Gray. Hearing the familiar roar of his leader, Gray responded quickly, but no matter how much he searched his surroundings, he saw no sign of Jonan. It wasn't until he lifted his head that he discovered, high in the sky above the forest, a colossal figure with wings outstretched descending from the heavens, instantly triggering a violent gust of wind. And amidst the rising dust and sand, Gray was finally able to see clearly. It turned out to be his elder brother. Soon, Jonan landed safe and sound. His enormous pair of dragon wings folded quickly, like an umbrella closing, pressing tight against his broad back. The moment he landed, Heli began to circle around Jonan's wings, filled with curiosity. Jonan patted Heli's head, let out a roar, and continued guiding him toward the south. Their objective was the central zone of the Jurassic world. After sunset, the night had already fallen in silence. We moved to enclosure number 3. This was the raptor enclosure, under the charge of Oven. He had brought the piece of meat from which the radio frequency chip had been extracted earlier. He gave it to each of the 4 raptors to smell, one by one. He made them memorize the scent of the 2 Indominus Rex. A little later, everything was finally ready. Oven mounted his ATV, while the team of mercenaries followed behind in an armored vehicle. They were going to put everything they had into a single strike. Release the raptors. As soon as Oven finished speaking, the iron gates of enclosure number 3 swung open with a thunderous roar. The 4 raptors, with Blue leading the way, shot out like bolts of lightning. Oven's ATV and the mercenaries' armored vehicle followed closely behind them. This was also the very first time since their birth that the raptors had ever seen the outside world. This allowed them to fully unleash their nature as high-speed hunters, which, to be honest, was exactly what they were born for. About 10 minutes later, the raptors suddenly seemed to catch a scent. They all slowed their pace. They had picked up the trail of the Indominus Rex. Oven immediately contacted the mercenaries following behind him over the radio. Soon, the raptors shifted their movement and eventually came to a complete halt. Oven and the heavily armed mercenaries quickly climbed down from their vehicles and continued on foot. Silence, a deathly, heavy silence filled the air. Even Oven wasn't immune. Cold sweat began to bead on everyone's foreheads. At that very moment, a soft rustling sound came from among the trees not far away. And then, under the shroud of night, a colossal dark shadow appeared before the 4 raptors and the eyes of the men. The trail had led them here, and as the raptors stopped, the sheer presence of the creature began to weigh on everyone present. It was a sight they had to see to believe, and only now were they witnessing the imposing Indominus Rex with their own eyes. There it was, standing before them, the Indominus Rex. There it was. Only by seeing it with their own eyes did Oven and the others realize just what kind of trail they had been following. They were struck by how truly enormous it was, and in that moment, the 4 raptors seemed small and insignificant by comparison. Standing before the beast, the 4 raptors seemed to share a strange, psychic perception. The creature had detected both the raptor squad and the humans, and it decided to step out and meet them head-on. We mustn't forget that the Indominus Rex carries raptor genes within its very body. This means it can communicate with the raptors without any species barrier getting in the way. Furthermore, we know raptors are highly intelligent creatures that live and breathe for the pack. Much like a pack of wolves, they instinctively obey the strongest leader, whoever that may be. Their true enemies should be those humans standing behind them, the ones who kept them prisoners since birth and raised them in captivity. Through low growls and hisses, the giant transmitted its message clearly to the four raptors. The message was simple: dinosaurs will never be slaves. Upon understanding those words, the four raptors turned in unison, fixing their predatory gaze on the humans behind them. And just like that, the entire situation on the battlefield shifted. It all made sense now. There was a reason those people never wanted to reveal the specific genes used to create this monstrosity. As it turns out, the tyrannical Indominus Rex also possesses raptor DNA. It was only at this exact moment that Oven finally realized the truth. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine as the weight of their mistake set in. What are you waiting for? Open fire. Kill it. Meanwhile, back in the control room, Hoskins was screaming in a state of pure desperation. The heavily armed mercenaries pulled their triggers, aiming every weapon they had at the towering creature. They unleashed a merciless rain of bullets upon the creature. However, every single bullet, without exception, sent sparks flying as they struck the Tyrannosaur's armored scales. The impact produced a metallic, deafening sound that echoed through the trees. Die, shouted a mercenary, who shouldered a rocket launcher and fired a missile directly at the beast. But then, something occurred that absolutely no one was expecting. The Tyrannosaur made a brutal, powerful leap toward the sky. From its sides, quite suddenly, a pair of gigantic wings unfurled, which, naturally, was the last thing the humans wanted to see. The Tyrannosaur surged upward, and we see the entire beast lift itself into the air. With the beating of its wings, a violent gust of wind lashed the area, forming powerful, whistling whirlpools of air. Nearby trees were knocked flat, and the people on the ground lost all control of their bodies as they were swept away. The missile impacted exactly where the creature had been standing just a moment before. The explosion was tremendous, setting a large part of the forest ablaze, yet it failed to leave even a single scratch on the beast. It's impossible. It can fly too? In the control room, Hoskins watched the real-time images in disbelief. He was in a state of complete shock. Quickly retreat. Oven barely managed to stay on his feet and shouted to the others who had been scattered in every direction. He called out to the mercenaries, whose formation had been reduced to an absolute disaster. Now, our enemies weren't just that cursed Tyrannosaur, but also the four raptors who had turned against them. He had barely finished speaking when a mercenary, who was just trying to stand back up, was suddenly tackled to the ground by Blue, the raptor. The raptor's razor-sharp teeth tore into him without a shred of mercy. The man let out a piercing scream of pure agony. The other mercenaries, seeing this, descended into a state of total panic. They began firing like madmen into the surrounding darkness, though they failed to hit a single thing. The velociraptors were far too agile, appearing and vanishing again like ghosts in the wind. For a long time, the screams of terror and the primal roars echoed through the depths of the forest. The mercenaries fell silent as the sounds of the struggle faded into the dark woods, and by now, Oven no longer cared about anything else. He turned on his heel and ran toward his ATV as fast as his legs could carry him. His only thought was escape, but in the very next instant, that colossal and terrifyingly familiar figure dropped from the sky and crushed the vehicle like a cheap toy, shattering it to pieces with a single step. Then, with one hand, the beast snatched Oven up as if he were nothing more than a small action figure. Hello, in your next life, you'd be better off staying as Star-Lord. Hianon bared his teeth at Oven in a mocking grin, right before the man's eyes filled with absolute, paralyzing panic. He opened his massive jaws and devoured him in a single, effortless bite. It was a pity, really, but that is what happens when you are the protagonist of the Jurassic World saga. This was precisely why Hianon knew he had to dispose of Oven first. By doing so, he ensured the four raptors would no longer have a reason to turn against him. After that bit of business was settled, Hianon took to the skies once again. He dove back down to eliminate the remaining mercenaries, treating them as if they were mere ants. He crushed them one by one until the entire mercenary team was completely wiped out. The four raptors, looking quite satisfied with the outcome, gathered loyally around Hianon. Clearly, they were planning to follow Hianon wherever he went. He let out a low roar in response, signaling his acceptance of their loyalty. After all, fighting alone rarely leads to a happy ending. As the saying goes, it is always best to unite every possible force under one banner. At that moment, we see Gray appearing from behind as well. He also carries speed genes, so he took a moment to communicate with the others. Gray's size and strength were also far superior to those of the velociraptors. Because of this, Blue had no choice but to step down as the second in command. Why does this scene remind us so much of a gang of outlaws? It's a bit uncanny. Watching Gray and the raptors sort out their hierarchy, Hianon couldn't help but find it slightly amusing. But these were no ordinary thugs. They were the true avengers of the prehistoric world. The targets of their vengeance were the very humans who had imprisoned and raised them in captivity. Deep down, they knew dinosaurs were never meant to be slaves. and in the end, they were determined to become kings once more. Hyenan let out another roar, and, leading Gray and the raptors, quickly left the area. After crossing the dense forest, they finally reached the central zone of Jurassic World. The humans had been hunting them for a very long time. Now, it was finally their turn to launch a counterattack. Meanwhile, back in the control room, Hoskins' face was an absolute picture of misery. The veins in his forehead were throbbing violently every few seconds. The operation he thought was in the bag had turned out to be a resounding failure. In his mind, the Indominus Rex was still the perfect military bioweapon. It was a pity, really, that there was no longer any opportunity to control it. The best thing to do now was to turn tail and run as fast as possible. Hoskins pulled out his cell phone and immediately dialed Dr. Wu. Dr. Wu, change of plans, he barked into the receiver. The mission had gone off the rails, and he ordered him to take all research results and evacuate immediately. They had to get out of that cursed place right then, Hoskins said with pure desperation. Dr. Wu already knew the situation and had no choice but to accept the order grudgingly. Meanwhile, Hoskins and the few remaining mercenaries arrived in a helicopter, ready to pick up the doctor. Just as the helicopter was taking off, a roar tore through the night sky like thunder, causing Hoskins, Dr. Wu, and the mercenaries to turn as pale as wax in an instant. It was that Indominus Rex bear once again, haunting their every move. This, we realize, was the true arrival of the Grim Reaper. Yes, it was that Indominus Rex bear back for more. The Reaper himself had arrived, and they told themselves it was simply impossible. It was absolutely impossible. How on earth could he be flying? And his size had become truly gigantic, looming over them like a nightmare. Dr. Wu recognized him instantly, a realization that chilled him to the bone. It was the Indominus Rex bear that he himself had created in his lab. To be honest, no one knew the Indominus Rex better than Dr. Wu. He knew its genetic makeup contained over 10 different animals, but it was impossible for it to grow pterosaur wings, let alone a head like a triceratops, complete with those massive horns. And we can't forget that tail, ending in a heavy club just like an ankylosaurus. To make matters worse, its body had grown to the staggering size of a brachiosaurus. He wondered what on earth was happening, or if the Indominus Rex bear's genes had mutated. Or perhaps, he thought, it was simply capable of evolving without end. Dr. Wu couldn't believe what kind of terrifying monster he had accidentally created. It was flying straight toward them, and the order was given to open fire. Quickly, open fire, Hoskins screamed, his voice thick with pure panic. Standing right at the door of the helicopter cabin was a massive mercenary. Dr. Wu watched, frozen in place, as the scene unfolded before his very eyes. The mercenary, wearing a savage expression, began to rain bullets down upon the creature. However, the beast didn't move an inch, enduring the hail of lead without flinching. Instead, it lunged directly toward the helicopter with terrifying speed. The aircraft had only just taken off and hadn't yet had time to accelerate away. Suddenly, the monster was right on top of them, a helicopter with a 30-foot fuselage. It looked pathetically fragile compared to the creature's gigantic and swift silhouette. Hoskins and Dr. Wu could only watch in sheer disbelief as the shadow loomed. They were both so utterly terrified that they couldn't even find the words to speak. But in the very next instant, we see the creature had already clamped its massive jaws around the helicopter's tail. The tough alloy structure of the fuselage, under that terrifying bite force and those steel-like teeth, was brutally crushed. The aircraft lost its balance instantly and plummeted toward the ground. Fortunately for them, the helicopter wasn't flying very high, though it still crashed and was reduced to a heap of scrap metal. Miraculously, those inside managed to escape with their lives. Just as Dr. Wu let out a sigh of relief and tried to crawl from the wreckage, that terrifying figure, like death itself, landed on the ground, the gale from its enormous dragon wings nearly blowing those insignificant humans away. Suddenly, it extended its scythe-like claws and, with effortless ease, tore through the aircraft's outer fuselage. Everyone who had been in the helicopter was still trapped inside the cabin. They were now completely exposed, including several mercenaries tasked with protecting Hoskins. They still tried to resist with their weapons, but were swept away by that massive club-like tail, which turned them to pulp in a single blow. Help me, help me, Hoskins screamed hysterically, his composure completely gone. He crawled out of the helicopter, clutching his large, round belly, desperately trying to escape the reach of Jinan. But with a single strike, the creature's claw completely covered the area where Hoskins was struggling. When it finally lifted its limb, Hoskins, at the bottom of the crater, had been reduced to a simple stain on the ground. In the end, the only one left lying on the dirt was Dr. Wu, who didn't dare to move as he stared at the beast just steps away, his face pale as a ghost and his lips trembling. He found himself utterly unable to utter a single word. Deep down, he realized he had been left for last on purpose, a chilling thought, to be sure. To him, this could only mean one thing. The monster actually recognized him. And then, Jinan extended those scythe-like claws once more and, using only 2 fingers, lifted the helpless Dr. Wu until their gazes were level with one another. Only then did he stop, and in that precise moment, Dr. Wu saw the corners of the creature's mouth stretch, revealing that characteristic, sinister smile once again. It was a smile that could only come from a place of deep, innate cruelty and malice. The truth was, Jianan knew the man standing before him perfectly well. When he had first arrived in this world, the very first person he had seen was Dr. Wu. Much like the Indominus Rex, he is a transgenic being. He has no parents. His creator was, in fact, Dr. Wu himself. That being the case, Jianan felt he had to thank him properly, in his own way, of course. With just a slight squeeze of his fingers, he snapped the neck of Dr. Wu, breaking the cervical vertebrae with ease and causing the man's eyes to fly wide open. His pupils dilated, lifeless, and in a single instant, he exhaled his final breath. Just like Hoskins before him, the face of Dr. Wu was frozen in a mask of total disbelief until the very end. He simply couldn't believe his fate was to die at the hands of the very creature he had created. After tossing the lifeless body of Dr. Wu to the side of the street, Jianan noticed a massive presence nearby. He felt a violent shuddering in the ground beneath his feet. It seems an enormous creature is approaching at full speed, and things are about to get even more complicated. The newcomer has already entered the range of the Tyrannosaurus's extrasensory perception. Quickly, we see a Tyrannosaurus Rex of colossal proportions coming into view. It's unclear exactly when they released it, but it was heading toward Jianan's position at full speed. And leading the way for the Tyrannosaurus was a woman, holding a lit flare in her hand. She was running as fast as she could, in heels, no less. Half an hour earlier, after the operation failed, Hoskins had fled the control room with his men. The other employees in the control room, seeing the imminent disaster, had also fled to save their own lives. In the end, only Claire remained. She didn't leave, because she knew that if she fled too, there would be no one left to stop that monstrous Indominus Rex. And to stop it, Claire could only think of one crazy and very risky idea. Using one dinosaur to finish off another dinosaur. Jurassic World currently has 11 massive enclosures, and in all of them, they raise animals of a truly wild nature. Fierce and carnivorous, and in enclosure number 9, we find none other than a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The Jurassic Park may change, but the Tyrannosaurus Rex is eternal. And the truth is, this Tyrannosaurus Rex is the real protagonist of the Jurassic saga. The Tyrannosaur Queen of Isla Nublar, her name is Rexy. And it was Claire who officially released the legendary Rexy. She set her free so she could face off against that monstrous and bloodthirsty Indominus Rex. Rexy, guided by Claire to this spot, saw Jianan immediately and let out a roar that made the earth tremble. For his part, Jianan, not to be outdone, responded with a roar of his own, standing 20 meters long and weighing over 50 tons. He was much larger and stronger than Rexy, but he didn't have the power to clear his own path just yet. The difference in size between the two was absolutely staggering. But Rexy didn't show even a hint of fear, and she certainly didn't back down. She was the first to attack, lunging forward with massive strides toward Heenan, opening her enormous jaws to bite his neck. Heenan met her head-on, clashing directly against her in a pure duel of brute strength. The roar of the impact was deafening, like a sudden clap of thunder, sending an invisible shockwave through the area. The ground beneath their feet simply couldn't hold. The force became overwhelming, and the earth began to crack and sink. An invisible shockwave rippled outward, causing the ground to give way under such immense pressure, fracturing and collapsing. At the same time, in the very instant of the collision, Rexy felt the impact of a colossal force that was impossible to resist. She was sent flying backward, completely crushing a nearby building as she landed. Her body lay buried under the rubble, with broken bones and torn muscles. All of that from just a single collision. Rexy had been defeated in an utterly crushing manner. And the most impressive part? Jianan wasn't even using his full power yet. After all, he didn't want to bully a weak, elderly Tyrannosaurus who was well past her prime. Jianan decided not to kill old grandmother Rexy. Instead, he intended to bend her to his will. Did she really lose that quickly? Claire had thought Rexy could at least put up a fight against that monstrous Indominus Rex. But Claire never imagined Rexy would be so powerless. She hadn't expected the fight to end as soon as it began. Right at that moment, Claire suddenly realized that the monstrous Indominus Rex was staring directly at her. And then, those enormous jaws began to open. Fresh blood was still dripping from between his massive fangs. He looked every bit as terrifying as a demon from a nightmare. Clyde barely had time to turn and flee before another female Indominus Rex appeared out of nowhere. And with a single, swift bite, she swallowed her whole. The newcomer was none other than Gray, who had finally made her entrance. She certainly hadn't expected dinner to serve itself the moment she arrived on the scene. The 4 velociraptors also approached quickly, closing in on the area. Jianan looked away. Without even realizing it, our group had wiped out the film's entire cast of protagonists. Mission accomplished, but since he had become a beast, he no longer considered himself human. He knew that those who were not of his own species would always have other intentions. This is a principle that applies to beasts just as much as men, it seems. For the version of himself that existed now, humans were, without a doubt, the enemy. He didn't care if they were main characters or merely secondary ones. Suddenly, Rexy's roar echoed out from amidst the ruins. She was only just then managing to struggle back to her feet with great difficulty. Gianna stood before Rexy, whose red eyes watched him like glowing coals while she let out a majestic roar. Possessing Tyrannosaurus Rex genes himself, it was only natural that he could communicate with her effortlessly. He gave Rexy only two choices, submit or die. The defeated Rexy no longer had that imposing, dominant air she possessed when we first saw her. Faced with such a powerful Tyrannosaurus, she had no choice but to lower her proud head in submission. Gianna nodded with satisfaction and, while he was at it, introduced Rexy to Gray and the Velociraptors. The team had just gained a new and powerful member. But this, as it turned out, was not nearly enough for his plans. Since Velociraptor paddock number 3 and Tyrannosaurus paddock number 9 were already open, he thought, why not simply open all the others at once? He would release every carnivorous dinosaur and let this storm unleash its full fury upon the island. No sooner said than done. Gianna set off immediately alongside Gray and the Velociraptors. In paddock number 1, we find a group of Compsognathus, small carnivores barely a meter long. If they leap on you as a pack, their bites are more than enough to inflict fatal wounds. Paddock number 2 housed 5 Dilophosaurus, medium-sized carnivores 5 meters long and weighing half a ton. They are capable of spitting a blinding venom that leaves their prey sightless and completely paralyzed. In paddock number 4, there were 2 Carnotaurus, large carnivores 8 meters long and weighing 3 tons. They are often known as the cheetahs of the Cretaceous period. Their running speed is, to be honest, quite extreme. Paddock number 10 held a Giganotosaurus, a massive carnivore with several spines growing along its back, a version that had been completely altered through genetic modification. Because of this, it is also known as the northern relative of the Giganotosaurus, the northern Giganotosaurus. With the thunderous sound of every paddock door Gianna smashed to pieces, all the carnivores were set free. This officially declared that Isla Nublar had been completely overrun. It was no longer a paradise for humans, but rather the undisputed territory of the dinosaurs. Finally able to escape their enclosures, the carnivorous dinosaurs, having reclaimed their freedom, let out roars of pure euphoria. Right at that moment, an extremely intimidating roar echoed down from the sky. When they looked for the source of the sound, they discovered, to their astonishment, a colossal, four-legged dragon. It didn't take them long to recognize him. It was this very dragon who had just smashed the enclosure gates to set them free. Jianin watched all these carnivores from the heights, dominating them with a single glance. The dinosaurs let out another majestic roar. The meaning was clear. In their lives, these carnivores had never known a true master. But now they were faced with a presence that commanded respect through sheer, overwhelming power. Jianin understood their instincts perfectly as the sound of their roars resonated within him. He could see the spark of defiance in their eyes, a wild spirit that refused to be tamed easily. For those carnivorous dinosaurs willing to submit, of course, he wouldn't make things difficult. And for those who wouldn't, well, he would simply beat them until they surrendered from the bottom of their hearts. Jianin wasn't going to waste any more time talking. He abruptly folded his dragon wings and went into a dive, aiming directly for the strongest among them, the Giganotosaurus. The Giganotosaurus was caught completely off guard by Jianin's sudden attack. He tried to dodge in a hurry, but by then, it was already far too late. An overwhelming, colossal force slammed into him, sending the Giganotosaurus's massive 15-ton body flying sideways like a baseball, crushing several structures among the trees as he went. He could barely withstand the impact. That was one down in a single second. And just as he landed, Jianin spun around, his massive tail sweeping through the air like a club and sending the Gylon on the other side flying. "Is this all the strength you have?" he seemed to ask. With all due respect, they were all quite pathetic compared to him. A hiss of pure panic echoed through the clearing. The Quetzalcoatlus, seeing that the situation had turned dire, quickly spread its wings in a desperate attempt to take flight and escape. Deep down, it surely thought that if it couldn't fight him, it could at least run away. But did it really think it could escape? Just as the Quetzalcoatlus used its hind legs to push off, Jianin was already upon it at bullet-like speed. Like a bolt of lightning, and using his 10-meter height advantage, he extended a claw and snatched the creature right out of the air. There was the Quetzalcoatlus, dangling 4 or 5 meters above the ground in a hopeless position. Then, without a second thought, he slammed it violently back down against the earth. The last remaining Therizinosaurus was now absolutely paralyzed with fear. It collapsed onto the ground, not daring to move a single muscle in the presence of such power. Jianin let out another imposing, dominant roar that shook the very trees. He forced them to hurry toward him, bowing their heads in a display of absolute loyalty and submission. The Quetzalcoatlus, still reeling from being crushed into the dirt, had no choice but to prostrate itself obediently. Finally, the Giganotosaurus was pulled from the rubble, and along with the Gylon, they too had become quite docile. As we know, the world of dinosaurs is governed strictly by the law of the jungle. The strongest is the one who leads, and in this way, Jianin subdued the carnivores of the Jurassic world, greatly expanding his forces. But we must remember that these were only the land-dwelling dinosaurs. He hadn't forgotten that in the central lake of this Jurassic world, an invincible Mosasaurus still waited. This Mosasaurus was, without a doubt, the most powerful creature in the entire Jurassic saga. In the film, we see it was this very creature that finished off the Indominus Rex in a single bite, the true hidden boss of the park. It measures at least 30 meters in length, making it significantly larger than any mosasaurus that actually existed. In the real Cretaceous period, they were smaller, and even the current Geonin wouldn't dare to provoke a beast of this scale. For the time being, however, they simply stayed out of each other's way. Geonin was in no particular hurry to subdue the mosasaurus. He decided to leave that challenge for another day. At this moment, he had something far more important to attend to. Geonin summoned his new Jurassic alliance and led them in an imposing march toward their final destination, the South Pier. The South Pier served as the primary gateway for the entire Jurassic world. Located on the southern coast of Isla Nublar, it is the only dock used for the arrival and departure of tourists. It is now the middle of the night, yet many tourists are still gathered here, waiting. Suddenly, from the depths of the silent night sky, a roar echoed that seemed to shake the very heavens. The people wondered what was happening, perhaps thinking it was merely a distant roll of thunder. The tourists on the pier all raised their heads in unison to search the darkness. They stared toward a dark cloud that was rapidly approaching through the night sky. As it drew closer, they realized with a shock that it wasn't a cloud at all. It was a massive, four-legged winged dragon, beating its wings and flying at incredible speed. Even from a distance, everyone could feel an incredibly powerful pressure and aura radiating from the beast. A true monster had arrived, and the human tourists who witnessed this scene fell into a state of uncontrollable panic. This enormous dragon, appearing out of nowhere, bore absolutely no resemblance to the familiar dinosaurs of Jurassic World. It was, quite clearly, a monster in every sense of the word. The tourists gathered at the pier area immediately descended into a state of total, unbridled chaos. At that very moment, a group of fierce carnivorous dinosaurs emerged behind the docks, effectively blocking any hope of retreat. They let out roar after roar, as if solemnly declaring to humanity that, from this point on, the island's sovereignty belonged to them. In the ensuing panic, the remaining tourists realized that to survive, they had no choice but to risk everything and leap into the ocean. We see them swimming desperately, driven by the simple, primal urge to escape the nightmare behind them. From that moment forward, Isla Nublar was left without a single human soul remaining on its shores. It would become a true forbidden zone for mankind, a place where we were no longer welcome. Geonin stood there, staring out at the distant ocean shrouded in the deep darkness of the night. He wondered what lay on the other side of that water. Were there more enemies waiting for him? But this is only the beginning of our story, and soon enough, the dawn begins to break. The sun rises, and a new day begins for the world at large. It should have been a wonderful day, but the appearance of a breaking news report soon shocked the entire planet. At the Jurassic World theme park on Isla Nublar, operated by the Mercenary Corporation, a massive dinosaur revolt had occurred, causing a staggering number of casualties among both the staff and the unsuspecting tourists. And on this very same day, a certain top-secret file was set into motion. It was delivered directly to the central office of the Monarch organization, located at Castle Bravo in the Bermudas. Inside, we find Dr. Serizawa, who had already finished reviewing the contents of that highly classified document. He realized that the fierce Indominus Rex was far more than just another dinosaur. It is a true monster, Serizawa murmured to himself, perhaps already sensing the scale of the coming storm. This top-secret file contained the terrifying truth behind the dinosaur uprising that had just devastated Jurassic World. According to the descriptions provided by the few survivors of the incident, this top-secret file doesn't just describe a dinosaur. It is a true monster, a terrifying, four-legged winged dragon that appeared at the pier at the very end. It brought a horde of carnivorous dinosaurs with it and unleashed a total massacre. Unless there are any surprises, that final winged dragon we saw is the fierce Indominus Rex. Serizawa hadn't expected that, alongside the kaiju leader Caesar and the three giant marauding beasts, we would now have yet another man-made monster. Beside him stood his assistant, Vivian Graham, watching with a sense of profound astonishment. She remarked that humanity's own greed and desire will eventually end up destroying us all. Serizawa, however, simply let out a long, weary sigh. The idea was to use an artificial monster to combat a natural one, like the kaiju leader, Caesar. Originally, he was just an ordinary chimpanzee, but because his mother was injected with a special drug during pregnancy, the newborn Caesar turned out to possess an intelligence far superior to that of any other chimp. Eventually, 2 years ago, Caesar led his clan in a rebellion and occupied the Muir Woods National Monument in San Francisco. For this reason, the Monarch organization established Outpost 11 right there in the Muir Woods Reserve. They considered Caesar to be the very first monster created by the hands of man. Then we have the three giant beasts from the Rampage incident: George the albino gorilla, Ralph the flying wolf, and Lizzie the giant crocodile, all of whom mutated after accidentally ingesting a biochemical agent from a genetic engineering company. A year ago, they caused absolute chaos in Chicago, and after the incident, the three giant beasts vanished without a trace. One could say both examples prove humanity is incapable of controlling these artificial monsters and will only reap what it sows. But as the saying goes, the only lesson humanity learns from history is that humanity learns no lessons at all. This fierce Tyrannosaurus is simply another bloody lesson in that very same book. The tragedy has already unfolded and the damage is done. At this stage, saying anything more is simply too little, too late. The Monarch organization can only step in now to try and clean up the mess. Because of this, Kun Sairu immediately drafted a formal request to Mano to be delivered to Monarch's high command, asking them to establish a new outpost near Nahuatl Island as well. To make it official, Kun Sairu even gave the fierce Tyrannosaurus a codename, Malaris. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had already passed since the rebellion at Jurassic World. We see that similar events have become increasingly frequent over the last few years. Almost every year now, a large-scale attack by mutated animals or monsters seems to occur. Humanity has already turned the dinosaurs into a great enemy, and yet, people have grown used to it. Public interest in this particular incident began to gradually fade as time slipped away. To be honest, people have simply become accustomed to living in this kind of world. And so, the fascination with the disaster diminished further with each passing day. Only the Monarch organization continued to keep a close eye on the situation at Isla Nublar. They had already gathered the necessary funds and personnel, preparing to launch an offensive on the island. After driving every human off the island, Tianan had also become a formidable enemy to the dinosaurs. He also began the difficult task of organizing the dinosaurs remaining within Jurassic World. The first and most pressing issue to consider, of course, was the problem of food. Without humans there to feed them, they would have to rely entirely on themselves to survive. To hunt successfully, they had to learn how to manage and expand their dwindling resources. To economize, in this case, meant learning to hunt with moderation. And so, he led all the herbivores, the Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, and Diplodocus, to the northern part of Isla Nublar. He established a fixed schedule, allowing the carnivores to go and hunt their prey only at specific times. Expanding their resources, however, meant finding other sources of food beyond the shores of Isla Nublar. Naturally, Tianan found himself leaning much more toward this second option. After all, if he wanted to keep earning gene points, he needed to hunt and eat constantly. Besides, he needed to seize this opportunity to find a new habitat far away from the island. To do that, he needed to evolve. According to the Jurassic saga, the island's dormant volcano will erupt in just a few years. Before that disaster strikes, John knew he absolutely had to find another suitable home. He had claimed the top floor of the Central Control Building, the highest point in Jurassic World, as his exclusive nest. Opening the simulator panel, John began to assign his points as he usually did. First, in one single move, he took all the gene points he had accumulated lately and assigned them to the Yin Yuang Long. In an instant, the Tyrannosaurus Rex began to grow again at a speed visible to the naked eye. He expanded until Jiannen's length finally settled at 30 meters, with a towering height of 15 meters. His wingspan reached nearly 100 meters, and his weight climbed to a staggering 500 tons. This far surpassed the blue whale, which is, as we know, the largest animal on Earth. But what truly surprised John was the infinite growth he gained from his gigantification evolution. It granted him the ability to shatter his natural limits and grow indefinitely. A length of 30 meters and a weight of 500 tons were, quite incredibly, only the beginning. After finishing with the Van Long gene, John moved on to strengthening the E Long gene. In one single move, he upgraded his flight ability to level 3. This increased his top flight speed to a remarkable 300 kilometers per hour. With that final adjustment, Jiannen's gene points were completely exhausted. And the effects of this upgrade, as we are about to see, were more than evident. A second later, John fiercely beat his 100-meter dragon wings, blotting out the sun as a flash trailed behind him. With an incredibly skillful catapult-like takeoff, he shot into the sky like a rocket. As he patrolled the entirety of Isla Nublar, he left a wake of destruction in his path. The explosive wind pressure he created swept through the sky with terrifying force. The air itself seemed to go still, but that wasn't all he had achieved. In these last few days, he had also managed to acquire 2 new genetic abilities. The Song Tu Long gene for a reinforced skull, and the Fu Shi Long gene for emitting sonic waves. First, we see the effects of the reinforced skull from the Song Tu Long gene. After John successfully fused with this new genetic material, the bones at the top of his skull became significantly thicker and harder. Second, there was the sonic wave emission from the Fu Shi Long gene. Once he had finished merging with the Fu Shi Long DNA, even though he didn't actually grow a crest on his head, he gained the ability to emit sonic waves and control their frequency at will. He could even adjust the pitch. Its applications, as it turns out, are quite broad. It allows him to receive information through sound waves, using it as a biological detection sonar. It can even be used as a sonic weapon, which, as you can imagine, is quite a handy trick to have. He opened his data panel to check his status. Race, Tyrannosaurus Rex. His physical stats were truly impressive, showing a total length of 30 meters. He stood 15 meters tall and weighed a staggering 500 tons. And yet, he felt that his gene points were still far too low. It wasn't nearly enough for what he needed, John lamented to himself as he soared through the air. He realized then that he would eventually have to leave Isla Nublar behind. He needed to find more prey, and besides, after all this time, his life level was still stuck firmly in the first stage. He wondered how exactly he was supposed to increase that life level. As for what the next stage would even be, John still had no idea. But before worrying about that, he had to deal with the last hidden danger in this Jurassic world. The little Mosasaurus needed to prepare itself to receive its new king. We move now to the Westlake district of Jurassic World. This is the vast aquatic zone where the Mosasaurus is kept and raised. In recent days, the Mosasaurus of Westlake had become increasingly restless. The reason for its agitation was simple. For several days in a row, not a single human had come by to offer it any food. All of this was, of course, the deliberate work of John Nan. He had intentionally left the Mosasaurus to go hungry for quite some time. This would, in theory, greatly reduce its combat power. Now that the tables had finally turned, it was the perfect moment to finally subdue the Mosasaurus. John Nan flew on without stopping, and soon we see him arriving over the skies of the Westlake district. Beneath the surface of the water, which appeared deceptively calm, a hidden current was churning with raw fury. He took off again, moving with sudden speed, and in the next second, the water's surface exploded as if a depth charge had been dropped. The water splashed upward like 1,000 arrows, and then it happened. A pair of enormous, terrifying jaws lunged directly upward to bite John Nan right out of the sky. Only when its massive body fully emerged from the water could we see its true, imposing form. It was a giant Mosasaurus, measuring well over 30 meters in length. He had been waiting for this. The fish had finally taken the bait. Using his elbows, which were as sharp as blades, he precisely caught the open jaws of the Mosasaurus. The Mosasaurus clearly didn't expect such a crafty tactic from its opponent. To be honest, neither did we. It tried to snap its jaws shut with every ounce of strength it possessed, but the power John Nan unleashed was far superior to its own. Not only was it unable to close its mouth, but its entire body was completely immobilized by his overwhelming strength. Heading for the shore, with another sweep of his 100-meter dragon wings, Jiannen's massive frame began to drag the Mosasaurus away by sheer force. Its massive body, weighing nearly 200 tons, began to rise. As it was slowly pulled from the depths of the water, the Mosasaurus descended into a state of complete and utter panic. It twisted and struggled frantically with every muscle in its body. It was like a fish gasping for oxygen, but right in front of him stood the Tyrannosaurus, who was significantly larger and more imposing. All of its desperate efforts were useless, and finally, John Nan hoisted the enormous Mosasaurus dozens of meters into the air, and then, with a violent and sudden impulse, he hurled it onto dry land. Now, if this had been an underwater battle, even with his clear advantage in size, being out of his element meant facing the Mosasaurus still carried a certain risk. But in a fight on land or in the sky, that monstrous Mosasaurus could only wait to be brutally dominated. Once on the ground, the Mosasaurus continued to struggle violently, fueled by its sheer mass. The dinosaurs wandering nearby, like our friends Gray and Dexy, received quite a shock. They couldn't help but feel intimidated by the Mosasaurus's size. Its destructive power was terrifying, but they were even more impressed by John Nan, who was currently delivering a thorough beating to such a formidable creature. It wasn't long before the exhausted Mosasaurus finally began to falter. It finally stopped moving, remaining completely defenseless at the mercy of its opponent. It was then that the Tyrannosaurus, who had been suspended in the air, finally landed, and he let out a truly majestic roar directed right at the Mosasaurus. The poor Mosasaurus could barely even breathe at this point. As it lingered on the brink of death, it didn't have a single shred of pride left. It had no choice but to submit before that imposing and colossal dragon-like body. Only after the Mosasaurus had shown its complete submission did John Nan return it to the waters of the Westlake district, allowing it, in the end, to keep its life, which was a generous move, all things considered. He even gifted it the carcass of a Wanan that was left over from his own meal. This caused the Mosasaurus, who was already half dead from hunger, to devour the food with pure greed. From now on, things would be different. He signaled that as long as he had food to eat, the creature would never go without. Furthermore, he intended to give the beast its long-awaited freedom. The ocean outside is much more vast than this tiny, cramped lake, after all. Through his roars, John Nan clearly communicated these intentions to the Mosasaurus. We see that, much like the other dinosaurs in the park, the Mosasaurus had been held captive since it was just a small hatchling. It had lived in such a narrow enclosure, but now that the Jurassic World power grid was completely destroyed, the high-voltage fence no longer functioned. The massive walls had also been torn down. And so, the Westlake finally stood connected to the vast, open ocean. The Mosasaurus understood exactly what he was trying to say. It let out a deep, prolonged roar in response. It was a sound filled with sincere gratitude. And now, at last, the Jurassic Alliance was finally gathered in its entirety. John Nan shook his dragon wings once more. He took to the sky and let out a thunderous roar, calling upon every member of the Jurassic Alliance. Under his command, they began to assemble. From the heavens, Finsingeland came flying in, accompanied by a massive flock of pterosaurs. In the water, the Mosasaurus emerged gracefully to the surface. On solid ground, the Indominus rex, Gray, and the Tyrannosaurus rex, Rexy, the Giganotosaurus giant, and many other carnivorous dinosaurs ran quickly to join the gathering. What a display, what a scene to behold. It is the return of the Dragon King, but in real life, this time. During these last few days, there had been a fierce power struggle within the Jurassic League, and John emerged as the undisputed leader of the dinosaurs. He was naturally chosen to be crowned as the Jurassic Dragon King, taking his rightful place at the very top of the hierarchy. In second place, as the sister of the Dragon King, we find Gress. Following her are the 5 Jurassic Dragon Generals. These are the Mosasaurus and the Giganotosaurus, the Tyrannosaurus rex and the Quetzalcoatlus. And after Gylon come the 8 Jurassic Rising Dragons. With this, the Jurassic League is officially established. Their distinctive motto is, to make the dragon race great once again. Ding! Congratulations! You have completed the Jurassic World. Reward obtained. 2,000 gene points. A notification from the simulator echoed in Jiannen's ears. Had he really completed the Jurassic World? Jiannen stood there, stunned for a moment. Immediately after, he felt a torrent of information flooding into his mind. This gave him a much clearer understanding of the world he was actually in. The world he inhabited wasn't just that of the Jurassic World movie. Instead, it was a world that fused several different monster films together. Planet of the Apes, the Zodiac Beasts, the Great Wall, Megalodon, and Kong, Skull Island. The dinosaurs of Jurassic World are just the tip of the iceberg. This world is much more complicated than he had ever imagined. The Jurassic World, perhaps it is merely the starting zone for rookies. King Kong, Godzilla, Ghidorah, and the rest of the Titan monsters. They truly exist. We are talking about the likes of King Kong, Godzilla, Ghidorah, and all those other massive Titan monsters. They are real, Titan monsters that easily exceed 100 meters in height, and they weigh tens of thousands, or even up to 100,000 tons. Interesting. However, Jiannen didn't take long to accept this new reality. And, in fact, his expectations and hopes for the future grew even greater. It is precisely because of this that the future becomes a much more exciting challenge. Returning to reality, with those 2,000 newly obtained gene points, he decided to use them all at once to evolve the remaining genes of Gylon, specifically the Pachycephalosaurus and the Fusilong genes. Gylon's gene evolved from simple flight to sonic flight. The resistance of his wings increased 5-fold, a significant upgrade, to be sure, and his flight speed can now reach the speed of sound, 1,224 kilometers per hour. The Pachycephalosaurus gene evolved from a simple skull to a bronze head and iron bones. Every bone in his body was strengthened, reaching a durability comparable to steel. The sonic wave emission of the Fusilong gene evolved into a sonic pulse. And so, the high-energy sound waves are emitted with devastating force. From his mouth, they are compressed and then propelled at high speed. This forms an extremely powerful shockwave. Soon, the evolution of the 3 genes was complete. This brought Jiannen an exponential strengthening and improvement. Now that the internal threats have been resolved, an order has been established, Jiannen plans to begin expanding outward. He thought he might go take a look at Isla Sorna first. After thinking it over for a bit, he chose Isla Nublar's sister island as his first target, Isla Sorna. And so, after giving instructions to Dr. Grace, he diligently set off, flying west with Isla Sorna as his sole objective. After leaving Isla Nublar behind, what appeared before his eyes was the vast and infinite ocean. Isla Sorna was located 140 kilometers to the west of Isla Nublar. However, for Jiannen, that distance was a journey of barely a minute. Flying at a high altitude, Jiannen was constantly accelerating. His flight speed was becoming greater and greater. The air resistance he faced was also becoming increasingly strong, with the air accumulating and obstructing his progress. The air is completely compressed as he passes through it. A shockwave forms from head to tail, and it explodes in a thundering roar. This, without a doubt, means that in this very moment, Jiannen has broken the sound barrier and achieved supersonic flight. Meanwhile, we turn our attention to Isla Sorna. An advanced team from the Monere organization has just arrived aboard several Black Hawk helicopters. Another lost island in the middle of the sea. I'm already sick of islands. The man speaking is the captain of this advanced team, James Conrad. In his former life, he served as an agent for the British Special Air Service. Back in 1973, he traveled to a mysterious island located deep in the South Pacific, a place of legends known as Skull Island. And although he was lucky enough to escape that living hell and eventually join the Monere organization, James developed a profound trauma regarding these types of islands. And who could blame him, really? But this time, the high command at Monere demanded that he and his partner, Weber, lead the advanced team to Isla Sorna to scout a location for outpost number 13. Don't worry, it's just a simple scouting mission to pick a site. There aren't many dinosaurs left on Isla Sorna anyway. It's not nearly as terrifying as Skull Island, Weber, the deputy commander, said to reassure him. James nodded. After all, since they were already here, complaining wouldn't do any good. Following a thorough search and exploration, the advanced team confirmed their chosen spot was in the maritime zone east of Isla Sorna. This is enough. Let's get ready to head back. "We're finally finished," James said, as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. For some reason, he had a terrible feeling about this. The advance team had confirmed the location and began boarding the Black Hawk helicopters one by one. They were ready to return to the Manhwa base and report their findings. Boom. Suddenly, a massive rock flew through the air and struck one with pinpoint precision. It hit one of the Black Hawks that had just taken off, completely shattering its rotor. The Black Hawk lost power instantly and plummeted from the sky, crashing violently into the ground. It was blown to pieces. Good God. What happened? Weber shouted, having witnessed the sudden scene. He couldn't help but scream out the name. Calm. James, however, seemed to realize something else entirely. His body froze as if he'd been struck by lightning, his eyes widening in pure disbelief. Calm. But isn't Kong supposed to be on Skull Island? How could it be possible for him to be here on Isla Sorna? But in the very next second, we see a giant albino gorilla. He came charging out of the forest, his body a display of pure muscle and power. He stood 12 meters tall and weighed a staggering 9 tons. The albino gorilla rose onto his hind legs and beat his chest with those massive arms. He let out a deafening roar. No, this isn't Kong. This is one of the 3 giant beasts that tore through Chicago a year ago. The albino gorilla. George. Weber recognized him instantly, her face showing she was completely shaken. Our organization, Manarch, had been searching for these 3 for quite some time. Giant beasts that had been missing for over a year. We never imagined they'd been hiding all this time on Isla Sorna, a place abandoned by humans. Alert, alert. Black Hawk 3 is down. Black Hawk 2, proceed with the rescue. James, with great difficulty, managed to maintain his position. He immediately barked an order through the communicator at that very moment. That was when a giant wolf, even larger and more ferocious, emerged from the forest. His entire body was covered in strange markings. They were a deep, dark black, looking as though they were forged from steel. His legs were long and agile like a cheetah's, and his claws were as sharp as razors. They glinted with an edge that would make anyone's blood run cold. Along his back and tail, spines were growing, much like those of a porcupine. He measured 26 meters long, stood 14 meters high at the shoulder, and weighed nearly 14 tons. Retreat. James, personally piloting Black Hawk 1, pulled up in a desperate hurry. He changed course immediately and fled toward the eastern sea. Seeing that the gorilla and the wolf weren't following, James finally allowed himself a sigh of relief. But just as Black Hawk 1 reached the coast, the once calm surface of the sea suddenly exploded, and from the waters emerged an enormous crocodile mouth, so massive it could swallow the entire helicopter whole. It was a giant crocodile, with a body even larger than Manhwa, the gorilla, and the flying wolf. Combined, even. A colossal crocodile reaching the incredible length of 68.5 meters. She stood 18.5 meters high, and she weighed a staggering 150 tons. This was Lizzie, the giant crocodile. In that moment, James felt his heart turn to ice. We see that Manhwa, George the gorilla, and Ralph the flying wolf were different. They had only inhaled the evaporated biochemical genetic agent. Because the gas had dissipated, their mutations were somewhat limited. But Lizzie, the giant crocodile, had gone much further with a single bite. She had swallowed the entire bottle of the genetic agent. In one single gulp, she drank every last drop, which, naturally, made her mutation far more terrifying than the others. The bloody maws of the giant crocodile swung wide open, and they clamped down on the tail of Black Hawk 1, violently ripping it from the sky. Damn it, brace for impact. James screamed with every bit of strength he had left. To be honest, this scene felt terribly familiar to him. Boom. With a deafening crash, Black Hawk 1 slammed into the coastline. Fortunately, the seawater cushioned the impact of the crash. James and Weber immediately unbuckled their seatbelts, and with every ounce of strength they had, they managed to scramble out of the wrecked helicopter. But as soon as they reached the surface, they were met with the colossal body of Lizzie. She was like a mountain, stretched out right before them. Those bloody maws and interlocking fangs were terrifyingly close. They were just inches away, and in front of such a beast, they were nothing more than a pair of ants. Just as James and Weber believed their end had come, something happened high in the distant sky. A deafening roar echoed through the air, sounding like the rumble of distant thunder. Despite the distance, upon hearing the roar, Sanaa, James, and Weber felt their eardrums vibrate. It was as if they had been struck deaf in an instant. The giant Lizzie also let out a deep grunt of pain, no longer paying any attention to those 2 little ants. She turned her massive body and searched with her gaze for the source of that roar. When they finally managed to recover from the daze, James and Weber looked up, and what they saw was the silhouette of a colossal 4-legged dragon that seemed to touch the very heavens. It was approaching at an absolutely breathtaking speed. Its 100-meter wings blocked out the sun, and with every beat, they covered the coast of Zonai Island. It brought a roaring hurricane along with it. Could it be that bear from Nublar Island? Or perhaps the wild Tyrannosaurus rex, Malaris? They both exclaimed in unison, finally recognizing his true identity. Compared to the data they had seen before setting out, Malaris's size seemed to have become even more colossal. And we have to wonder, how on earth could he fly so fast? He was producing a sonic boom, clearly reaching supersonic speeds as he moved. Within the roaring hurricane, Lizzie the giant crocodile, Ralph the flying wolf, and George the albino gorilla let out roars full of fury. To them, Zonai Island was their territory and theirs alone. And this giant dragon was nothing more than an invading monster. Deep down, he thought these three giant beasts looked somewhat familiar. The newcomer was none other than Gianni, who had come to Zonai Island to investigate the situation. An albino gorilla, a flying wolf, and a giant crocodile. It was quite the trio. Weren't these exactly the three giant beasts from the movie Rampage? To think they would appear here on Zonai Island, it was, to be honest, incredibly convenient. Especially now, when he found himself in such desperate need of genetic points. The points he gained from common animals were a pittance, hardly worth the effort. Only by hunting more powerful mutant beasts, or even giant ones, would he be able to secure more genetic points. These three beasts from Rampage looked, in his eyes, very tempting indeed. He was certain that the points they dropped would be anything but small. Gianni fixed his target first on the smallest of them, George the albino gorilla. Folding his enormous wings, he dove from the sky like a falling meteor. And just like that, a terrifying shadow covered the gorilla completely. When George, the albino gorilla, saw the Tyrannosaurus Rex lunging straight toward him, he hoisted high the massive rock he had just used to bring down the helicopter. Seeing the Tyrannosaurus Rex closing in, George the albino gorilla raised that same heavy stone with all his might. And then, he smashed it with incredible force right against the creature's head. Gianni didn't even flinch. He didn't even bother to dodge the blow. He simply allowed the rock to impact directly against his skull. There was a dull thud, and the entire rock shattered into 1,000 pieces. Thanks to his Pachycephalosaurus genes, which gave him a bronze head and iron bones, Gianni withstood the impact completely. He emerged entirely unharmed, and a second later, his steel claws moved like lightning, fueled by the momentum of his dive. He struck at George's neck, aiming for a clean decapitation. The scene was like watching a razor-sharp knife slicing through soft fruit. George, the albino gorilla, who had been so full of life just a moment before, found his head and his body suddenly taking very different paths. He collapsed to the ground, nothing more than a headless corpse. We see the notification. He has successfully hunted a mutated silverback gorilla. Genetic points obtained, 1,000. The genetic analysis reveals the mutated silverback gorilla gene. It includes muscle density, the shark gene for infinite growth, the blue whale gene for accelerated growth, and the beetle gene, providing 100 times more explosive power. 1,000 genetic points. As we might expect from such a mutant beast, the reward for the hunt is truly enormous. What also surprised Gianni was that, after taking down George the albino gorilla, he could extract 4 different types of animal genes. It seems this was all thanks to the biochemical genetic serum that caused the creature's mutation in the first place. But for now, he decided it was best to worry about the loot only after the fight was finished. The battle has already begun. We need to get out of here, and quickly. Taking advantage of the fact that the giant beast's attention was elsewhere, James managed to get a clear look. He wanted to escape the intense battlefield in a hurry. Otherwise, those massive creatures might crush them with a single careless step. As if they were nothing more than insignificant ants, really. Just at that moment, Fire and Ralph had already unleashed astonishing, cheetah-like speed to close the distance. Suddenly, he leaped with immense power, opening his massive jaws wide. And he lunged forward, intending to sink his teeth into the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Fire and Ralph attacked and bit down with pure ferocity. But instead of tearing through Gianni's cheek as he expected, he ended up shattering his own teeth. It was as if he had bitten into an incredibly hard plate of solid steel. Having missed his first strike, Ralph the flying wolf, acting like a true assassin, immediately extended all 4 limbs. He pushed off to soar into the air, attempting to make a hasty retreat far away. But, of course, how could Gianni possibly let him escape so easily? Using his powerful hind legs, he delivered a stomp that made the very earth tremble, and with a single movement, his enormous claws rose up. With a sweeping strike of his leg, he managed to snag the hind paw of the flying wolf, Ralph. With just a casual tug, the small body of Ralph the flying wolf was slammed against the ground by the Tyrannosaurus. Immediately after, his massive dragon-like body crushed the creature from above. Trampling Ralph's head with a weight of over 500 tons, Fire and Ralph let out a heart-wrenching scream in an instant. In the very next moment, he was no longer breathing. A mutated gray wolf has been hunted, and we see the genetic points being awarded. 3,000 points. Upon analyzing his genes, the resistance-strengthening level of the gray wolf gene was revealed. In comparison, Fire and Ralph provided far more genetic points than previous hunts. He also had a greater variety of animal genes fused within his body. But before our protagonist could even take a breath, the Deinosuchus, with its enormous body and slow movements, finally approached Jianan. This fellow was not only massive, but his attack power and defense were also extremely high. His jaws, possessing a terrifying bite force, were more than enough to crush a tank. The bony armor on his body, reinforced with phosphorus and potassium, could easily resist any conventional human weapon. Dealing with him would be no easy task, and he was closing in fast. The Deinosuchus, which had seemed so sluggish, suddenly whipped its tail. The upper half of its body shot forward like a released spring. What explosive power! Jianin only felt a whistling gust of wind coming straight at him. The enormous Deinosuchus opened its jaws at an exaggerated angle, aiming directly for Jianin's neck. If it managed to land that bite and combine it with its signature death roll, the consequences would be truly disastrous, to say the very least. However, Jianin's reaction speed was even greater than the beast's sudden burst. His psychic perception allowed him to anticipate the Deinosuchus's movements before they even happened. With precise timing, he managed to seize the creature's upper jaw firmly, and then, using nothing but brute force, he began to pry it wide open. The Deinosuchus sensed the immediate danger and began to struggle desperately to escape. But it was already too late, as he forced the massive mouth apart with sheer strength. He tore it from the corners, leaving it so wide that the creature could no longer close it. The Deinosuchus, writhing in absolute pain, let out a heart-wrenching howl of agony. Opening its shattered snout further while fighting for its life, it finally managed to break free from the Tyrannosaurus's grip. Seeing this, Jianin turned around and decided to launch a direct attack from the inside. Using the force of heavy impacts and lashes, he aimed directly at the Deinosuchus's internal skeleton. After Jianin slammed it violently more than 10 times, the ground all around them was completely pulverized. He realized that the Deinosuchus was now either completely unconscious or its entire body had simply given up. To be honest, its bones were likely reduced to little more than dust at this point. The massive body finally collapsed, drained of all its strength and will to fight. It had become nothing more than a giant piece of meat, ready to be torn apart. And here we see that a mutated American alligator has been successfully hunted. 10,000 genetic points have been awarded for this impressive feat. Upon analyzing its genes, the caiman gene is discovered within the sequence. It is quite a harvest, providing a wealth of osteoderms and reinforced bone armor. Hunting those 3 furious giant beasts had suddenly granted him 14,000 genetic points. A notification appeared, congratulating him for overcoming the challenge of the furious giant beast. The reward was finally obtained, the Fury Serum. He received 3 doses of this serum, the same genetic agent developed by the Energen Corporation in the movie Rampage. It is a potent biochemical agent designed to fuse the genes of multiple animals together. It is capable of causing rapid, unpredictable genetic mutations in any animal it touches. In that moment, another notification chimed in the air. Ringing clearly in Jianin's ears, it confirmed the acquisition of the Fury Serum. Jianin could hardly contain his surprise at such a find. This was pure gold, even if he didn't actually need it for himself. After all, he certainly wasn't lacking any of the diverse animal genes the serum contained. As the battle ended and the thick dust began to settle, we returned to the aftermath of the Fury Serum's arrival. It was only then that Jianin finally noticed James and Weber lying on the ground. Imagine the scene. It's much like when a human walks down a path normally. They simply don't notice the tiny ants beneath their feet. He had been so completely immersed in the heat of the battle. Naturally, he hadn't spared a single thought for those insignificant humans nearby. Furthermore, he felt that these two looked strangely familiar to him. He wondered for a second if they were the god of mischief, Loki, and the formidable Baron Mordo. But no, Jianin quickly realized they were just ordinary, everyday people. And nearby, we see the wreckage of the Black Hawk helicopter that the 3 furious beasts had brought down earlier. On the fuselage, a logo in the shape of a sideways funnel was clearly visible. The Manhwa organization. Jianin finally recognized it for what it was. So, it turned out these 2 humans belonged to the Manhwa organization from the Monsterverse. He wondered what the purpose of the Manhwa people could possibly be here on Isla Sorna. Had they come specifically to investigate those 3 furious beasts? Or was their true objective Jianin himself and the rest of the Jurassic dinosaurs? Whatever the case, Jianin knew one thing. He didn't want any human surveillance in his territory. And the Manhwa organization, naturally, was no exception to that rule. James and Weaver, with a great deal of effort, managed to pull themselves up from the devastated ground. But suddenly, they felt a cold shiver run through their entire bodies. When they slowly lifted their heads, they saw the crimson eyes of Miraluz staring fixedly down at them. And then, a dragon's snout as massive as a celestial pillar descended upon them like a collapsing mountain, crushing them like simple ants. It was time to check the progress, so Jianin opened his data panel. His body data now showed a length of 30 meters, with a height of 15 meters and a weight of 1,000 tons. It was exactly as Jianin expected, though his size hadn't changed. The drastic increase in muscle density had doubled his weight. With an explosive power 1,000 times greater, the maximum force he could unleash now reached 1,000,000 tons. Furthermore, he now possessed high-speed regeneration. As long as his body wasn't completely destroyed, he could heal and regenerate rapidly as time passed. Furthermore, we see that the animal genes he had fused were growing in number. They already totaled 18 different species. The next priority for reinforcement would remain the strengthening of the main gene's physical structure. That, as he well knew, was the true foundation for increasing his power. With the remaining 10,000 genetic points, John Nan continued applying them to fuel the unlimited growth of his body size. His massive frame expanded and grew once again. Every single part of the Tyrannosaurus Rex's body underwent another explosive growth spurt. In the end, his length increased to 50 meters, while his height surpassed 25 meters. His weight suddenly skyrocketed to 5,000 tons, comparable to that of a conventional naval destroyer. He distributed the remaining 5,000 genetic points between his steel-armored skin, reinforced steel muscles, and bronze-iron bones. Additionally, he improved his teeth one by one into grinding steel and his claws into interlocking steel talons. After spending nearly all of his genetic points, John finally returned his focus to reality. He continued patrolling the entirety of Isla Sorna, only to discover that there were hardly any creatures left on it. However, the general ecosystem of Isla Sorna was still remarkably well preserved. Without human destruction, the island's ecosystem was ideal for dinosaur life, and John Nan was already planning to make this place his second base of operations. By now, it was getting late. Without him even noticing, dusk began to fall, so John Nan decided not to stay on Isla Sorna any longer. Suddenly, he unfurled a pair of dragon wings with a 150-meter span and took to the skies once more. Carrying the carcasses of the three giant furious beasts, he began his journey back to Isla Nublar.